Hundreds of bandits trapped Yi-Do beneath siege weapons. They never noticed the cardboard drone above them. Its camera exposed every formation and escape route. Yi-Do carried modern memories and a secret merchant system. That system could place future technology directly in his hands. A shotgun had already erased more than 30 trained bandits. Now, the same advantage revealed the mountain's hidden kill zones. What looked like certain death to everyone else looked exploitable to Yi-Do. The trouble began while Yi-Do was speaking with Wang Lao-Wu near Wang family village. Wang Mengzi, the village chief's spoiled son, strode over and started insulting Yi-Do with the confidence of someone never punished before. He mocked Yi-Do's village, threatened the women under his protection, and assumed his father's status made him untouchable. Wang Lao-Wu lowered his head instead of arguing, because everyone in the village had learned to endure the young tyrant. Yi-Do had no interest in continuing that tradition. He seized Mengzi by the neck, lifted him off the ground, and let the boy discover that family status weighed nothing in Yi-Do's hand. Mengzi still shouted threats, ordered Wang Lao-Wu to attack from behind, and promised to make Yi-Do regret touching him. Wang Lao-Wu's fists trembled, but he stayed where he was. Two of Mengzi's followers rushed forward, and Yi-Do kicked them down before either man reached striking distance. Then he dragged Mengzi across the dirt and planted a foot into the boy's stomach hard enough to fold him over. A few sharp slaps finally interrupted the stream of insults. Yi-Do tossed him aside and told him to grow stronger before trying that performance again. Mengzi burned with humiliation, but the argument ended before he could answer. Screams erupted from the edge of the village. Black-clad attackers rushed from the darkness with blades drawn, while archers fired at anyone trying to flee. The first villagers dropped so quickly that confusion turned into panic before anyone understood where the attack came from. Yi-Do counted at least 30 bandits, and their coordination immediately separated them from ordinary mountain thieves. One of their leaders was a disguised man Yi-Do had crossed paths with before. Their movement, discipline, and aggression reminded him more of trained soldiers than desperate criminals. Wang Lao-Wu grabbed a firewood knife and prepared to charge straight into the killers. Yi-Do ordered him to protect his wife and family instead. When Wang Lao-Wu hesitated, Yi-Do threatened to abandon him completely if he wasted his life on a useless charge. That finally broke through the panic, and Wang Lao-Wu turned back toward his family. Then Mengzi did something Yi-Do had not expected. The followers who had encouraged his arrogance scattered, but the beaten teenager grabbed a farming hoe and charged the bandits alone. An arrow punched into his shoulder. He kept moving. A bandit kicked him in the chest, sent him rolling through the dirt, and left him coughing blood. Mengzi still forced himself upright with red eyes and prepared to charge again. Yi-Do had to admit the kid possessed courage, even if it currently came attached to almost no judgment. Wang Lao's wife proved even more decisive. She beat her husband back toward Yi-Do with a stick and shouted that dying beside their savior was better than hiding while he fought. Yi-Do decided Wang Lao had married far above his own level. He ordered both husband and wife downhill, then slipped into the darkness before the enemy archer could track him. The woman in the tree had been watching his last position. One moment he was there, and the next her target had vanished. She shouted a warning toward the bandit leader called Leopard. The warning arrived too late. Yi-Do appeared close enough to see Leopard's expression and fired the shotgun at point-blank range. The blast tore through the bandit leader before he could react. Yi-Do moved again while the surviving bandits were still turning toward the sound. He found the female archer among the branches and called just loudly enough to make her look toward him. A second shotgun blast ended her part in the fight. Her final arrow flew wild and buried itself in the dirt dangerously close to Mengzi. The boy screamed and rolled away with more urgency than he had shown against the bandits. Yi-Do kicked him farther from the fighting and told him to stop obstructing people who actually knew how to kill. With Leopard and the archer dead, Yi-Do expected the remaining attackers to break. Instead, more than 10 rushed him together with blades raised. Mengzi finally discovered useful survival instincts and flattened himself before scrambling out of their path. Several bandits refused to close the distance and threw weapons instead. Yi-Do dived behind a dead tree, brought the shotgun up, and fired into the tightly packed group. Steel pellets tore through faces and chests, turning their formation into gaps. He kept moving between cover, reloading only when distance and terrain gave him time. The bandits had numbers, but Yi-Do had a firearm, battlefield experience, and enough sense not to stand in one place. By the time Mengzi returned with villagers carrying hoes, poles, and other farming tools, the battle was already finished. They found Yi-Do crouched among the bodies, searching pockets and stripping away anything valuable. Weapons went into one pile, coins into another, and useful clothes disappeared into his growing collection. The villagers thought his calm behavior made him terrifying. In reality, his hands were still shaking from the fight. Fear simply had to compete with poverty, and poverty won whenever valuable equipment was lying unattended. Mengzi looked across the mangled battlefield and immediately lost his color. He bent over and vomited. The men behind him followed almost together, turning one reaction into a chain of collapsing stomachs. A few fainted, and others discovered they had much less control over their bladders than their pride suggested. Yidu kept looting, while the village slowly recovered from the sight. The old village chief arrived, checked that Mengzi was still alive, and bowed deeply toward Yidu. He admitted that the villagers had caused trouble earlier, and thanked Yidu for saving them anyway. Then hundreds of villagers dropped to their knees and began kowtowing. Yidu found that considerably more uncomfortable than the gunfight. It became difficult to strip dead criminals for useful cloth, while grieving grandmothers cried and thanked him nearby. He reluctantly left several bodies unfinished. Some newly widowed women began looking at him with a very different kind of calculation. Their husbands were dead, famine surrounded them, and the man in front of them had just killed an entire bandit group alone. Yidu noticed the looks and pretended not to notice the looks. Sukan arrived with his beggar followers and stared over the battlefield. He gave Yidu an enthusiastic thumbs up, while the rest of the beggars looked at their old friend as if he had become a legend. Before tonight, those men wanted food, work, and perhaps a chance to marry into Yidu's village. Now they were thinking about something larger. If a man like Yidu truly protected his followers, then beggars who had spent their lives being kicked aside could finally stop living defenseless. Mengzi reached the same conclusion in his own dramatic way. He walked straight to Yidu, dropped to his knees, and started slapping his own face while apologizing. His father tried to stop him. Mengzi shouted that nobody should interfere until the man who saved his life forgave him. Yidu caught his wrist before the boy damaged himself further. He told Mengzi that pride was acceptable, but arrogance without strength only made a person ridiculous. Mengzi nodded with painful sincerity and promised to change. Yidu suspected the promise really meant Mengzi would behave around him while remaining dangerous to everyone else. The old village chief tried to suggest that his villagers had helped kill the bandits so the government might share the reward. Mengzi immediately turned on his own father. He shouted that Yidu had killed the attackers alone and that stealing credit from their savior was shameless. Then the boy proposed a simpler strategy. Follow Yidu loyally, and rewards would come without lying. His father agreed with impressive speed. Yidu had just finished taking useful fabric from another corpse when a familiar voice screamed for her brother. His younger sister Xiuning came running through the darkness with the family's huge white cat behind her. She had tracked Yidu by forcing the animal to smell one of his used socks. The cat had apparently vomited from the experience, but still pointed her in the correct direction. Xiuning checked Yidu from head to toe for wounds before noticing the open backpack beside him. Coins, jewelry, weapons, and scavenged valuables filled it almost to the top. Her embarrassment at his corpse looting weakened when Yidu handed her a gold bracelet. Sukan proudly explained that her brother had killed the entire bandit group. Xiuning immediately puffed up and declared that no future in-laws would ever bully her because she could beat them herself. That statement worried Yidu more than the bandits had. More villagers from surrounding settlements soon arrived with farm tools, hoping to join the fight. They were far too late. All they could do was stare at the bodies and watch Yidu pack away the remaining loot. Envy spread through the crowd almost visibly. Many of those men had recently mocked Chinga village for being filled with widows and poor women. Now the same village had a leader carrying gold, military skill, and enough force to erase a bandit group. One man loudly claimed that he had always known Yidu was a remarkable battlefield veteran. Yidu thanked him for the convenient memory and then made his position clear. Anyone who insulted or threatened Chinga village from that point forward would answer to him. Mengzi enthusiastically pointed at the dead bandits as evidence that this was not an empty warning. Yidu then reminded the crowd that several villages had been spying on his movements and considering ways to steal from him. Heads dropped all across the gathering. Sukan recognized the perfect moment to shift the mood. He dragged the old village chief aside and began complaining loudly about how hungry his beggars were. Yidu played along and asked why the men did not simply work for him. If he could feed a village full of women, he could feed a group of useful men. Sukan reacted as though the suggestion were a miracle and immediately pledged his people. Then he added that their stomachs were already empty, applying pressure without losing the smile. The surrounding villagers leaned closer because they wanted the same thing. Most of them were really hoping Yidu would divide his bandit loot without asking for anything in return. Yidu had no intention of teaching that lesson. He proposed a bounty hunting force instead. The surrounding mountains were full of wanted criminals, and one trained group could turn those criminals into government money. Sukan loudly praised the idea and volunteered his beggar village first. Mengzi started coughing until everyone looked at him, then kicked several young men from his village toward Yidu. He demanded that they stop acting like cowards and accept the jobs being offered. The chief of Wei Family Hollow understood the performance immediately. He could see that Yidu and Sukan were guiding the crowd, but he could also see a profitable opportunity. He pledged fighters from his village as well. Yidu laid out the conditions before enthusiasm could outrun discipline. Each village had to feed its own recruits properly, including meat and eggs whenever possible. The men would train at Chinga village and could not leave camp without permission. Bounty income would be divided by a fixed structure rather than by whoever shouted loudest. 40% would go to Yidu for command, equipment, planning, and risk. 30% would be divided among fighters according to merit. The remaining 30% would return to their home villages. The villages that accepted the plan agreed quickly because they had already seen what amateur bounty hunting could cost. Several larger clan chiefs laughed at the idea and walked away. They boasted that their families could mobilize hundreds of men without depending on Yidu. Yidu let them go. 100 untrained men could die faster than 30 disciplined fighters, and he had no interest in arguing with people determined to learn painfully. Wang Laowu started toward the hecklers until his wife grabbed his collar. She told him to ignore them and concentrate on serving the man who had already saved their family more than once. Without Yidu, she reminded him, Wang Laowu would be dead and their household would collapse. He immediately returned to Yidu. Yidu was already looking past the night toward a much larger problem. Chinga village could not remain safe simply because he personally carried a gun. He needed trained manpower, organization, logistics, and people capable of fighting when he was somewhere else. The bounty squad would earn money, but more importantly, it would create the first layer of that organization. Wang Laowu suddenly threw himself flat on the ground and offered Yidu lifelong service. His wife had reminded him that even a small kindness deserved repayment, and he considered Yidu's help far beyond small. Yidu pulled him upright and called him brother. That single word hit harder than any payment. A man who had spent years being dismissed by his own village suddenly felt publicly recognized by the strongest person present. Sukan nearly laughed because he had seen Yidu use the same kind of loyalty building years earlier. After the crowd finally dispersed, Yidu gave a large share of the recovered bandit wealth to Wang family village for its losses. That decision erased the last doubts among many villagers. Sukan's beggars loaded the bandit bodies onto carts and hauled them back toward Chinga village. Yidu's mother greeted Sukan warmly because she had known him since childhood. She ordered the oldest sister, Shower, to prepare food and drinks for the exhausted men. Shuer moved through the house with quiet grace, while Yidu's younger sisters stared in horror at the carts of corpses outside. Sukan eventually sat down at the family table and gave Yidu the look of a man ready to discuss compensation. He already knew most beggars would fail direct combat selection. What he wanted was the hauling, scouting, transports, and logistics work nobody glamorous cared about. Yidu pushed a bowl of wine toward him. They drank together, and the new division of labor became official. The beggars then discovered another danger they were completely unprepared to face. Chinga village contained many young women, while most of Sukan's men had spent years living without even casual female company. Several stared so hard at curious women outside the window that they could no longer sit naturally. Shuning nearly choked trying not to laugh at them. Yidu offered indoor space for the night, but Sukan refused. His men gathered firewood and camped outside beneath the trees instead. That arrangement protected both the women and the beggars from creating problems nobody needed. Yidu asked the older night watchwoman to keep residents indoors, while the dead bandits remained around the village. Then he took a lantern and began patrolling the storage area himself. Too much money had been taken from the attackers to trust darkness and good intentions. Behind one tree, he found Jia Yi waiting alone. She admitted she had come because she heard he fought more than 30 bandits and could not stop worrying. Yidu teased her for treating him like someone already belonging to her household. Her face reddened, but she did not deny the implication. Their relationship had moved far beyond casual interest, and both of them knew marriage discussions were approaching. Jia Yi asked him to stop taking unnecessary risks because Chinga village was no longer the only place depending on him. Yidu answered the concern with reassurance, rather than pretending the danger had been small. After a quiet moment together, she remembered a practical request. Yidu planned to travel to the garrison the next morning and collect the government bounty. Jia Yi's younger sister needed new chest wrappings, but embarrassment kept her from shopping for them herself. She offered Yidu copper coins and asked whether he could bring suitable cloth back from town. He refused her money and promised to handle it. The request was intimate enough to make Jia Yi blush, and Yidu wisely stopped the teasing before it became a real argument. Before leaving, she told him her family's house was almost repaired and asked him to visit after returning from the city. Yi-do agreed. Jia-yi walked home with the kind of smile that made his dangerous new life feel briefly normal. Morning turned the aftermath into business. Sukan's beggars loaded the bandit corpses onto carts while Yi-do gathered documents, weapons, and anything needed to prove the kills. Summer heat made the journey miserable almost immediately. 30 bodies under a brutal sun produced a smell strong enough to make grown men breathe through their sleeves. The road was good enough to keep the carts moving, and nobody wanted to discover what another hour of heat would do. Sukan rode high on Yidu's ox cart, with the posture of a victorious general. Travelers stopped and stared at the procession. Most bounty hunters struggled to find one wanted criminal at a time. Yidu was arriving with an entire wagon train of dead ones. Sukan enjoyed every shocked face as if he had personally fought the battle. At the military garrison, Captain Lei Kui came out quickly after hearing Yidu had arrived. He inspected the bodies, matched identities against wanted notices, recorded the kills, and authorized the official bounty. That payment was only the first layer of profit. Yidu had already learned that isolated officers desperately needed military achievements. Many were noble sons or ambitious professionals stuck in a quiet post where promotion required combat credit they could not earn. Bandit corpses solved that problem. Yidu provided documented kills, and officers paid to attach those achievements to their own records. It was morally flexible, politically common, and extremely profitable. A young officer named Pei Guang tried to buy the female bandit leader for 20 strings of cash. Before the deal closed, Chu Yu stepped in. Chu Yu came from the powerful Chu family and carried himself like a man accustomed to turning family influence into leverage. He dismissed Pei Guang's offer and quietly negotiated for the entire batch. Yidu warned that selling bodies one by one could earn favors from many different officers. Chu Yu answered that one serious favor from the Chu family was worth more than a collection of minor obligations. He also admitted that his own position was unstable. Political trouble had pushed him into the backwater garrison, and without military merit, his career could stall permanently. That honesty made the negotiation easier. After haggling, Chu Yu bought the corpses at 20 strings each and even allowed Pei Guang to claim one body. Combined with the official bounty, Yidu's total haul reached roughly 1,000 strings of cash. The beggars stared at the money, as though someone had opened a royal treasury. Yidu immediately paid bonuses. Each beggar who helped with transport received 150 copper coins. Nearby bounty hunters watched carefully. They did not care much about the small bonuses. They cared that one successful hunt had turned into a fortune through government rewards and military credit sales. Yidu had deliberately allowed them to witness the transaction. More hunters chasing criminals would create more corpses, more military credit, and more reasons for officers to keep Yidu's network profitable. Captain Lei Kui received his agreed share as well. Yidu understood that systems worked smoothly when the people controlling gates, records, and signatures also benefited. The captain was using much of his money to support underfunded soldiers, which made the arrangement easier to justify. Then Lei Kui returned debt papers connected to Chinga village. He told Yidu that various contributions had already covered enough of the old obligations to consider them settled. Yidu asked him to keep the papers secure anyway. A debt that could be collected later was more useful than a dramatic gesture today. Lei Kui also warned that the dead bandits had come from another province and might have stronger connections than local villagers realized. The garrison had purchased the bodies and would take responsibility for any official fallout. That cleanly separated Yidu from the political problem. The captain then studied him with an uncomfortable amount of interest. He noticed changes in Yidu's internal energy and guessed that Yidu had begun sleeping with a woman. Lei Kui complained that years of cultivation could be slowed if Yidu wasted too much vital energy without special methods. Yidu turned bright red. The captain sighed and lectured him about focusing on martial training instead of chasing women. Then Lei Kui gathered spending money and prepared to leave the garrison himself. Yidu asked where the great defender of self-discipline was going. Lei Kui claimed his old bones required therapeutic treatment in town. The explanation was so transparent that Yidu understood immediately. The man lecturing him about women was heading toward a brothel. Yidu bowed, decided hypocrisy was above his pay grade, and left. Soon afterward, Lei Kui's daughter appeared near the stable and learned that Yidu had visited without anyone telling her. Her disappointment was obvious. Lei Kui reminded her that she had rejected meetings with most soldiers seeking introductions. She answered that Yidu was different. The captain suddenly became much less comfortable. He had already noticed Yidu's lost cultivation and was now imagining a valuable son-in-law slipping away. Yidu knew nothing about that family discussion. He was taking Sukan and the beggars to celebrate. At a restaurant, he ordered enough stir-fried dishes to make the younger beggars stare in disbelief. The senior men used the table while juniors squatted nearby and attacked pork bones with complete concentration. Yi-do kept waiting for some arrogant customer to insult the dirty beggars in a respectable establishment. Nobody did. A waiter even brought warm water so they could wash before eating. Sukan laughed at Yi-do's confusion. The dynasty's founding emperor had once been a beggar. Stories about that origin made sensible people cautious about humiliating the poor. Nobody wanted history remembering them as the fool who mocked the next emperor before he rose. After the meal, Yi-do pushed 2 heavy chests of coins towards Sukan. The money represented roughly 100,000 copper coins for the beggar community. Sukan immediately tried to refuse. His people had sold intelligence, helped move bodies, and provided support, but he argued that Yi-do had taken the actual combat risk. Not one beggar reached greedily toward the chests. Their eyes followed the money, but discipline held. Yi-do insisted that intelligence and logistics were real work. Without scouts, transports, and trusted hands, even the strongest fighter wasted opportunities. Sukan still worried that Yi-do needed money for officials, equipment, and Chinga village. One of the older beggars pointed out that their group had nowhere luxurious to spend such a fortune anyway. That answer irritated Yi-do more than greed would have. He told them that if they refused fair payment, he would stop asking them for help. Sukans understood the real message. Accepting wages meant accepting partnership instead of charity. He took the money and declared that Chinga village's problems would be treated as their own. Yi-do immediately corrected any heroic talk about dying for him. The point was to help these men earn money, build homes, marry, and live better, not throw their lives away proving loyalty. A joke about how little some of them had to protect below the belt sent the whole table into laughter. Sukan laughed too, but he understood a harder truth. Money attracted violence, and the stronger their operation became, the stronger their protection would need to become. Before heading home, Yi-do bought salt, rice, flour, oilcloth, and other practical supplies. He also looked for the chest wrappings Jia had requested. The city shops offered nothing he considered comfortable enough. So he opened his hidden merchant system and bought 2 sets of silk undergarments from the modern catalog. One was for Jiayi's sister. The other was for Jia because her own worn wrappings were clearly overdue for replacement. Yi-do justified the extra purchase as practical household maintenance rather than romance. Even he did not completely believe that explanation. Sukan left a dozen stronger beggars near Chinga village permanently. By day they could beg, gather information, and run errands. By night they would patrol the roads and watch for thieves. At the same time, Yi-do's name was spreading through military circles he had never met. A young officer from another province had been hunting the same bandit group and lost more than a dozen men without catching them. When a garrison officer casually mentioned that the entire group was already dead, the outsider refused to believe it. His own province had sacrificed far more soldiers against those criminals. He demanded the name of the warrior responsible. The garrison officer avoided answering. The outsider then offered money, surrendered claims to military credit, and asked for the mysterious fighter's service file. He wanted to transfer that man into an elite unit. The garrison demanded a large development payment before releasing anything. The outsider paid without hesitation. When he finally opened Yi-do's file, the information inside changed his expression completely. The record did not describe a lucky village brawler. It pointed back to a former deputy inspector with real battlefield experience, a man who had survived northern fighting and earned respect from officers above his current station. That made the outsider's earlier offer look less like recruitment and more like a desperate attempt to secure rare talent before another commander noticed. The garrison officer who sold access to the file understood that desperation perfectly. He took a large development payment from the outsider and still warned that Yi-do had a difficult temper and did not respond well to orders. The outsider considered that normal. Talented soldiers were supposed to be difficult. What he had not yet understood was that Yi-do was no longer looking for another military master. He was building his own network through villages, beggars, officials, merchants, and armed men. A transfer order alone could not buy that. Yi-do remained unaware of the growing interest. He was busy meeting Jia with a small package hidden in his sleeve. She took one look at the silk garments and turned bright red. The design looked far more daring than the plain cloth used locally. Yi-do explained that the fabric was cool, soft, and better suited for summer. Jia protested that he had spent too much. Her fingers continued stroking the silk while she complained. Even during better years, her family had rarely seen cloth of that quality. When she realized he had bought a second set for her, embarrassment gave way to something warmer. Then she caught his sleeve and started pulling him toward her house. Her mother had specifically asked that Yi-do visit. He pointed out that he had just returned from the road and looked dusty. Jia Yi looked him over and declared that he remained handsome enough without changing. Yidu accepted the shameless compliment without resistance. The Wang family's small clinic stood on the west side of the village. Mother Wang treated poor patients for almost nothing, which kept the clinic busy and the family permanently short of money. When Yidu arrived, she was using acupuncture on a man suffering from circulation problems. The treatment warmed his hands and feet quickly enough that waiting patients began joking about his restored health. Jia Yi's younger sister was in the back room collecting herbs from a cabinet. A dirty hand suddenly reached toward her. She jumped away just before a large man grabbed her. The man had the body of an adult and the mind of a child. He stared at the frightened girl and repeatedly demanded that she become his wife. His father, Old Sun, was a pharmacist from town. Instead of stopping the behavior, Old Sun stood near the front and talked loudly enough to hide what was happening behind him. The arrangement was too deliberate to dismiss as an accident. When Mother Wang tried to pull the man away, he shoved her aside. Village women arrived with sticks, but hesitated, because the attacker was much larger than any of them. He looked around the crowded clinic and announced that he wanted several women, not only Jia Yi's sister. Yidu stepped into the doorway before the situation became worse. A dozen freshly washed beggars stood behind him. The large man looked at Yidu and made another crude demand. Yidu decided conversation had reached its useful limit. He caught the man's wrist and struck him repeatedly across the face. The blows hurt, humiliated, and disoriented him without doing permanent damage. Several teeth fell out before the man collapsed into a corner and began whimpering. Old Sun exploded in outrage and threatened to report Yidu for assault. Yidu kicked him in the stomach hard enough to fold him over. Old Sun hit the ground crying, coughing, and promising that his nephew would make Yidu pay. The nephew, he claimed, served as one of the county sheriffs. Yidu asked whether that was supposed to make the original attack acceptable. When Old Sun repeated the threat, Yidu gave him another professional beating. Then he threw father and son outside. He shouted that Old Sun should bring the sheriff if he wanted official judgment. If nobody came, Yidu would visit the town pharmacy personally and settle the matter there. Workers eventually carried both men away on a bamboo stretcher. Mother Wang needed several minutes before her hands stopped shaking. Yidu asked Little Tiger, one of Sukon's sharper beggars, what he knew about the sheriff. The man had held county power for several years and recently failed to earn a promotion. Since then, his reputation had hardened into that of a bitter local tyrant. Little Tiger suggested dealing with him quietly before he could move first. Yidu refused. The county had more than one sheriff, and this man's badge did not frighten him enough to start murdering officials in alleys. Once the immediate danger passed, the real purpose of Yidu's visit returned. He was meeting the woman who might become his mother-in-law. Mother Wang studied him carefully. She reminded Yidu that her late husband's political conviction had marked the whole family. Marrying Jia Yi could damage the career of any ambitious official. Yidu looked around the poor clinic and laughed. He was the village chief of a settlement filled with widows and refugees. He asked what glorious career everyone thought he was protecting. Then he started carrying the gifts inside. Premium rice, meat from the garrison, cloth, and medicinal herbs filled the small house faster than Mother Wang could object. She had expected a suitor to discuss dowry. Instead, Yidu arrived with supplies her patients and daughters desperately needed. He even apologized for not bringing more, because the visit had been arranged quickly. His own mother had been useless when he asked what gifts were appropriate. Jia Yi's younger sister watched the exchange with mixed curiosity and jealousy. She had once encountered Yidu before her older sister did, but an embarrassing stomach problem had ruined the timing. Now she privately regarded that mischance as a personal tragedy. While Yidu was meeting Mother Wang, Old Sun's house became its own disaster. The beaten pharmacist lay in bed while his adult son kept asking for a wife. The son's attention eventually shifted toward Old Sun's young concubine. That frightened everyone enough for the sheriff nephew to intervene immediately. The sheriff arrived furious and demanded a full explanation. Old Sun's household gave him an exaggerated version that made Yidu sound like a violent monster. The sheriff prepared to retaliate. Then his informant returned with one important fact. Yidu was connected to the military garrison. That changed the calculation. The garrison carried more force in the county than one sheriff, and the new magistrate maintained close ties with military leadership. The sheriff's own stalled career made direct conflict even more dangerous. A deputy advised making peace. The sheriff dismissed everyone and reconsidered his options alone. When Old Sun later demanded that Chinga village be destroyed, the nephew refused. He told the household that Yidu was not someone their family could casually provoke. His concern for his uncle did not extend far beyond that warning. If the old pharmacist refused to calm down, and somehow lost his property, the sheriff was already thinking about inheritance. Yi-do spent the rest of the afternoon helping Mother Wong repair the clinic and house. As evening fell, he discovered that the family was too poor to own a proper oil lamp. Darkness turned simple furniture work into a dangerous guessing game. Hands reached for tables, boards, shelves, and occasionally the wrong person. Yi-do quickly decided his first visit to a future mother-in-law's house did not need that kind of confusion. He announced that repairs would continue in daylight and escaped before embarrassment grew worse. Mother Wong walked him out with both daughters. All three women looked more flustered than anyone wanted to discuss. Back home, Yi-do found a completely different atmosphere. Money and food had softened the constant pressure inside his own house. His mother smiled more often. The younger sisters laughed while playing, because they had been given a rare evening without chores. Shu-ning washed dishes without being asked, which Yi-do considered almost supernatural. Shuers sat nearby sewing quietly. Their mother asked how the Wong family visit had gone, and whether she needed to intervene in the marriage arrangement. Shower then raised a complication. Jia-yi and her younger sister resembled each other closely enough that future family life could become awkward. The younger girls immediately suggested Yi-do marry both sisters. Yi-do rejected that idea fast enough to make everyone laugh. Legally, the era allowed arrangements that would have been impossible in his previous modern life. Morally, Yi-do still found the suggestion uncomfortable. He ended the conversation before his mother turned it into a real negotiation. After dinner, Shu-ning demanded martial arts practice. She dragged Yi-do into the courtyard and trained hard enough to keep metal and wood striking for more than an hour. Jia-yi had quietly come to see Yi-do but heard the noise from outside. She waited, hoping the practice would end. It did not. Eventually, she returned home without interrupting the siblings. The next morning, Yi-do went back to the Wong house and resumed repairs as promised. Jia-yi appeared later than usual, looking tired and unusually embarrassed. Yi-do assumed she had slept poorly and concentrated on moving furniture. Her younger sister watched her with the expression of someone who knew more than she planned to say. Village gossip, meanwhile, focused on old Sun's beating. Many people could not believe Yi-do had attacked a pharmacist with a sheriff in the family. Yi-do treated powerful connections the same way he treated rumors. Neither stopped a fist once someone crossed a line in front of him. Mother Wong had also learned more about the bandits Yi-do killed. The group was connected to the notorious Slang Mountain outlaws, criminals government forces had struggled against for years. When she understood the scale of what Yi-do had done, she sat down hard in shock. She told Jia-yi that Yi-do's future was far brighter than his current title suggested. With his military background and new achievements, he could pursue serious command if he wanted. Mother Wong believed one reason he remained at Chinga village was the people depending on him there. She urged her daughter to cherish the relationship instead of taking his protection for granted. Jia-yi listened with complete seriousness. Her younger sister soon brought Yi-do tea and casually called him brother-in-law. That small change told him Mother Wong's household had moved another step toward accepting the marriage. For a short time, the morning felt peaceful. The Wong sisters were still adjusting to the strange silk garments Yi-do had brought from the city. The fabric was softer and more supportive than anything available from ordinary village shops. Jia-yi's younger sister was delighted by the comfort and immediately accused her older sister of hiding the best gifts for herself. Jia-yi denied everything, with the dignity of someone who had absolutely considered doing exactly that. Their mother ignored the argument and focused on whether the garments could be washed without damaging the material. Yi-do wisely stayed out of the discussion. Once he realized every answer would create another embarrassing question. The sister's growing comfort around him also changed the household atmosphere. Jia-yi still blushed easily, but she no longer looked frightened whenever marriage was mentioned. Her younger sister began treating Yi-do like a brother-in-law before any formal ceremony existed. Mother Wong watched all three of them with the practical expression of a woman, calculating whether this new family connection could finally bring stability. Yi-do did not promise rank, luxury, or political restoration. He kept showing up with medicine, food, labor, and protection. For Mother Wong, those concrete things mattered more. The next morning also revealed how differently the two sisters handled affection. Jia-yi tried to act composed while clearly thinking about Yi-do every time he crossed the courtyard. Her younger sister noticed, teased her relentlessly, then fled whenever Jia-yi threatened retaliation. Yi-do understood none of the whispered arguments and decided ignorance was safer. He concentrated on leveling uneven ground, repairing the clinic wall, and replacing boards damaged by years of poverty. At one point, he changed his shirt behind a tree, because working in summer heat had soaked the fabric through. That small attempt at privacy became the reason he heard the marriage officials before they saw him. Then, loud official voices arrived at the front of the property. The visitors belonged to the County Marriage Bureau, an office that officially managed marriage registration and vulnerable households. In practice, some of its officers treated unmarried women as opportunities for bribes, threats, and forced matches. Their leader walked into Mother Wong's yard, sat down without permission, and immediately insulted both daughters for remaining unmarried. A deputy claimed criminal families had no right to delay marriage once daughters reached the legal age. He also hinted that the family's remaining property could be absorbed into dowry arrangements if officials decided they were resisting. Mother Wong tried to prevent a confrontation. She explained that Jia Yi already had a match and pointed toward the food and gifts Yi Du had brought. The officials were not interested in evidence. They had heard the Wong Clinic was attracting patients who once bought medicine from Old Sun's pharmacy. That made the visit less about marriage law and more about pressure. The lead official slapped food from the table and mocked the family for trying to bribe government servants with cheap meals. Jia Yi's younger sister finally lost her temper. She pointed at the gifts and said her future brother-in-law had brought them because he intended to marry Jia Yi. The deputy laughed and called the engagement fake. Then he threatened the younger girl with an unwanted mountain marriage when she became eligible. He ordered one of his men to slap her. Jia Yi stepped in front of her sister and told them to hit her instead. The officials immediately reframed that protection as resistance to lawful authority. Yi Du was in the back courtyard, changing out of a sweat-soaked shirt after repairs. He heard the shouting and dressed quickly, checking himself several times before climbing over the wall. The last thing he needed was a public indecency scandal while confronting corrupt bureaucrats. He gathered nearby beggars and walked around to the front. The marriage officer looked Yi Du over and recognized only a village chief with a poor settlement. He warned that Qingha village contained many unmarried women and threatened mass registration if Yi Du failed to cooperate. Mother Wong tried repeatedly to signal that the official should stop talking. She had already watched Yi Du beat people who pushed too far. The beggars arriving with clubs should have made the warning obvious. The officer misunderstood Yi Du's silence as fear. He boasted that one letter to the county magistrate could remove a village chief's title. Then one of his men kicked over the medicine cabinet Yi Du had spent the morning repairing. Bottles shattered. Herbs Mother Wong had gathered by hand scattered across the floor. The man claimed he had once suffered stomach problems after buying medicine there and called the clinic dangerous. Another official suggested taking all 3 Wong women away immediately. Mother Wong stared at the ruined medicine in silence. She had endured her husband's political downfall, poverty, public suspicion, and Old Sun's harassment. But medicine was the one part of her life she still controlled. Watching officials destroy that work finally broke her composure. She collapsed. Both daughters rushed to catch her. Jia Yi tried pressure points, but her mother did not wake. The village women gathered outside and were too frightened of the officials to intervene. Jia Yi finally called Yi Du forward. She hated asking for help, but her mother's breathing mattered more than pride. Yi Du told the younger sister to bring silver acupuncture needles. He removed Mother Wong's shoes and placed needles at key points in her feet and palms. The crowd watched with complete silence. Within half a minute, Mother Wong opened her eyes. Whispers immediately spread that the village chief also understood medicine. Several patients began mentally scheduling their own future treatments. Little Tiger had reached the end of his patience. He asked whether the officials wanted the beggars to rearrange their faces for bullying women directly in front of Yi Du. The lead officer puffed himself up and started another speech about law. A new voice cut across the yard. The speaker asked whether the imperial court truly expected its servants to behave like thugs. Sheriff's son stepped through the crowd. He was the same nephew Old Sun had threatened Yi Du with. Everyone expected him to arrive as an enemy. Instead, he announced that he had been watching the marriage bureau's behavior and found it disgraceful. The lead official's confidence vanished. Sheriff's son wore the authority these men had been using as a weapon, and everyone in the county knew his reputation. Some people in the crowd became visibly terrified before he even raised his voice. What Yi Du did not yet know was that Sun had spent the previous night searching for a way to repair his uncle's mistake. He had learned enough about Yi Du's military connections to understand that fighting him would be political suicide. At dawn, Sun emptied a large amount of his uncle's available cash into gifts and rode toward Qingha village. He expected a difficult apology. Instead, he arrived while another group of officials was actively abusing the family Yi Du intended to marry into. The opportunity could not have been better. The marriage officer dropped to his knees and tried to explain that he had not known Sheriff Sun would come. Sun answered that the problem was not his presence. The problem was a court official humiliating a village chief, threatening an engaged woman, and destroying a healer's property. The officer desperately claimed he had not known Yi Du was connected to Sun. That excuse only made the corruption more obvious. Sun turned toward Yidu and apologized for poor discipline among county personnel. Yidu understood exactly what the sheriff was doing. Sun needed forgiveness for old Sun's behavior, and public protection gave him a clean path toward it. There was no reason to reject a useful hand, simply because the motive was self-interest. Yidu dismissed the officials as irritating flies. Then he added that one particular fly seemed determined to override village authority and drag away a woman who was already engaged. If officials behaved that way everywhere, he said, people would eventually stop trusting the government. The marriage officer started shaking. Sun kicked him across the yard and announced that the blow came from a concerned subject of the dynasty. Then the sheriff pulled out paper and a brush. He began documenting the incident in front of everyone and promised to send a formal recommendation to the county magistrate. The officer realized that losing his post could be more dangerous than any beating. For years, he had created enemies by forcing families into marriages and extorting vulnerable households. His badge was one of the few things protecting him from revenge. The head marriage commissioner arrived while the scene was still unfolding. He had actually sent this officer to Chinga village because he believed harassing Yidu would please Sheriff Sun after old Sun's beating. Now he found Sun defending Yidu and destroying the career of the very man sent to help him. The commissioner's face revealed the calculation before he spoke. Sheriff Sun had failed a promotion, but his political network still reached far above a small marriage office. More importantly, Sun was visibly treating Yidu as someone worth protecting. The commissioner also knew rumors that the military garrison valued Yidu and that an outside officer had begun asking about him. He tried to argue that Chinga village had resisted lawful enforcement. Sun shut him down. He reminded the commissioner that retiring relatives could no longer protect foolish subordinates forever. Then, Sun announced that he would speak to the magistrate personally about the entire bureau. The threat landed harder than violence. The commissioner knew his own influence was too weak to survive a direct political fight. Sun smoothly changed his expression and asked Yidu for a tour of Chinga village. He said the county should understand the needs of a settlement filled with women surviving without husbands. Yidu accepted. They walked away together, while the marriage officials remained in the yard, looking ruined. The dismissed officer collapsed almost completely. The commissioner kicked damaged furniture in frustration after Yidu left. One of Sun's deputies immediately stepped from the side and reminded him that any further damage had to be compensated. The deputy also asked whether he should report the commissioner's recent comments about Sheriff Sun being unimportant. The commissioner nearly coughed blood. He paid for the furniture and then chased one of his own subordinates down the road with a stick. Elsewhere, another village chief had been preparing a much more dangerous mistake. Chief Lu from Shao village heard that Yidu was resisting the marriage bureau and assumed county officials would weaken him. Lu gathered retired soldiers and armed men, planning to use the confusion to attack Yidu. He reached the area and saw Sheriff Sun holding Yidu's umbrella while deputies brought tea. Lu slapped himself twice to make sure the scene was real. His villagers asked why one county sheriff frightened him so badly. Lu answered that men like Sun were effectively the sky for ordinary rural chiefs. Then his retired soldiers noticed Yidu. One old veteran stared long enough for his hands to begin trembling. He recognized Yidu from military headquarters. The veteran remembered a deputy inspector who had led elite cavalry through Turk lines and helped rescue surrounded troops. Other retired soldiers recognized the description and turned furious eyes on Chief Lu. They demanded to know why he had ever considered provoking a former commander respected by officers far above their village. Lu suddenly understood that the man he dismissed as a widow village chief carried a military past he had never investigated. The assassination plan died before anyone drew a weapon. One troublemaker among Lu's people remained bitter. Shao had lost farmland after gambling debts and blamed Yidu for consequences that were mostly his own fault. He watched quietly and kept that resentment. Inside Chinga village, the women were overwhelmed by Sheriff Sun's visit. They swept roads, cleaned doorways, and prepared to kneel whenever the official approached. Yidu stopped them from prostrating and said a respectful curtsy was enough. Sun supported the decision. He told the women the government had failed communities like theirs and promised to examine what assistance could be offered. The same residents who recently criticized Ji for attracting Yidu now reconsidered. If her future husband could make a county sheriff behave like a polite assistant, perhaps Jia Yi had not been reckless at all. She might simply have recognized value earlier than everyone else. Jia Yi's younger sister climbed a ladder and watched Yidu from over the courtyard wall instead of helping with repairs. Mother Wang ordered her down. The girl complained that official compensation already covered more food than the family had seen in years. Jia Yi noticed her sister staring and became visibly less amused. She also struggled to understand Yidu's growing network. First grain came through useful contacts, then garrison officers treated him as a partner. Now a county sheriff walked beside him. Jie privately wondered how many hidden layers her future husband still had. Yadu assumed Sun would make one theatrical visit and disappear. The sheriff proved more prepared than that. His assistants carried household registries, land records, and tax documents. They measured plots, inspected damaged homes, and calculated possible reductions or subsidies while walking. At the farmland, Sun surprised Yidu further by kneeling beside an older woman and pulling weeds with practiced hands. The old woman froze because she could not process a county sheriff working in her field. Yidu checked Sun's palms and saw real calluses. This was not a man who had spent his entire life behind a desk. When Sun began discussing agricultural economics, Yidu's opinion shifted again. The local drought was only one problem. Soil near the coast carried too much salt for many ordinary crops to thrive consistently. Sun proposed medicinal herbs, wolfberries, jujubes, mulberries, and other higher-value plants better suited to the conditions. He argued that women in Chinga village could handle delicate cultivation while earning far more than grain farming offered. If the village built a specialty market before neighboring settlements copied it, merchants would have to negotiate with them. The county would collect more taxes later, and residents would depend less on emergency aid. Sun even knew detailed planting methods. Yidu asked whether he had proposed the same plan elsewhere. Sun's enthusiasm collapsed. He had. Almost nobody listened, and the political effort contributed to his failed promotion. Yidu immediately saw why. The idea was intelligent but ahead of local conditions. Famine households could not wait through long growth cycles. Transportation made imported grain expensive, and peasants distrusted crops they had never relied on. Sun had solved the profit problem before solving survival. Yidu did not humiliate him with that analysis. The sheriff had helped his people that day, so Yidu returned something valuable. Using knowledge from his previous modern life, he described a cultivation and processing method that reduced several practical obstacles. Sun's eyes brightened. He pulled out a notebook and wrote so quickly that his deputy had to remind him they still had other duties. On the road back, a deputy questioned why Sun had spent so much time flattering one village chief. The marriage commissioner was already running to the magistrate, and Yidu seemed too low-ranking to justify the risk. Sun answered that the deputy understood nothing. Captain Lei Kui had warned senior officials that anyone interfering with Yidu's affairs should think carefully about their own necks. The garrison considered Yidu a valuable source of money, military credit, and results. Attacking him meant creating problems with the entire local military network. Sun also looked back toward the fields. If Yidu's agricultural method worked, the sheriff admitted, bowing to one village chief would feel cheap compared with the career it could revive. Before leaving, Sun delivered one final gift. The deed to Old Sun's town pharmacy had already been transferred into Mother Wong's name. Old Sun had been sent away to retire in the countryside. Yidu understood that the nephew had removed an inconvenient uncle and improved his own position at the same time. He accepted the deed because the farming method he had shared was worth at least that much in future value. Sun also promised support for house repairs and land redistribution. Yidu did not mistake cooperation for friendship. Today, Sun smiled because Yidu was useful. If that usefulness disappeared, the same man might step on him without hesitation. Yidu smiled back, accepted the game, and kept his emotions separate from the alliance. Sun's people unloaded enough gifts to fill several carts and left before Yidu could refuse. Passersby stared as beggars hauled everything into Chinga village. The story spreading by evening was simple. The sheriff had personally brought gifts to a settlement everyone recently considered doomed. Yidu took several famous local smoked sausages from the pile and carried them to Mother Wong's house. He found Jia Yi's younger sister being chased with a broom because she had been avoiding chores. The moment Yidu offered sausage, her suffering vanished. She bit into it and looked so happy that even Mother Wong stopped scolding for a moment. The girl then asked how Yidu had known which sister she was. Yidu answered that Jia Yi claimed she was never the one getting hit with a broom. The younger sister immediately accused Jia Yi of being a liar. Across the yard, Jia Yi watched Yidu kneel beside the damaged medicine cabinet and hammer loose nails back into place. An hour earlier, high officials had been competing for his attention. Now he was repairing shelves in her mother's poor clinic. That contrast mattered more to her than any public display of status. Yidu spent the afternoon sorting herbs and repairing whatever the officials had damaged. Peace lasted until the marriage commissioner returned through the gate. He looked as though the county magistrate's office had physically processed his apology before sending him back. Fresh bruises covered his face, and he walked carefully. The dismissed officer came with him and dropped to his knees almost immediately. He apologized to Yidu, Mother Wong, Jia Yi, and her sister in rapid succession. Then he began slapping his own face hard enough to loosen teeth. Yi-do told him the people he had harmed mattered more than dramatic self-punishment. Jia Yi forgave him quickly, because cruelty did not come naturally to her. The man kept apologizing anyway, until Mother Wang's expression made it clear that his presence had become another disturbance. After they left, Mother Wang pulled Jia Yi aside. The family now owned a town pharmacy, but Mother Wang wanted to operate it, rather than treat it as charity. She told Jia Yi that Yi-do should be considered the real owner, because the opportunity existed only through him. Jia Yi carried the proposal over. Yi-do rejected it immediately. The pharmacy belonged to Mother Wang's family, and could be treated as part of the marriage support he intended to provide. Mother Wang had predicted that answer. She had already told Jia Yi that if Yi-do refused ownership, the daughter could manage the profits for their future household. Jia Yi then raised a practical concern. Her mother understood medicine, but not wholesale herb markets. Suppliers in town could easily overcharge her. Yi-do said his merchant system could provide many herbs at prices local dealers could not match. He did not explain the system itself to Mother Wang. He simply promised reliable supply. When nobody was looking, Yi-do took Jia Yi's hand. She checked that her mother and sister were distracted, then let him hold it. Their relationship had reached the stage where 5 minutes apart felt unnecessarily long. Yi-do told her about another idea for Chinga village. Women could turn wheat stalks into durable straw hats using a technique he remembered from his previous life. The hats could block sun and rain, fold easily, work as fans, and even serve as simple seat cushions. Materials were cheap because most farmers treated leftover stalks as waste. Labor was exactly what Chinga village had in abundance. Jia Yi looked at Yi-do as if discovering another hidden profession. He reminded her that killing bandits was not the only skill a person could learn in 2 lives. Then he suggested she help organize the first production experiments. That simple cottage industry would soon become more valuable than anyone around them expected. Before the first workshop existed, Yi-do wanted Jia Yi and Xiaoning to understand the idea together. Jia Yi admitted she was nervous about dealing with Yi-do's sharp-tongued sister. Yi-do told her not to worry, then immediately found evidence that the concern was reasonable. Xiaoning was asleep on a haystack with the family's huge white cat curled beside her. For several quiet seconds, she looked like a perfectly gentle young lady. Then their mother's voice carried across the yard, asking where the lazy girl had hidden. Xiaoning launched upright before her eyes fully opened. She grabbed a pitchfork, started attacking the hay, and shouted that she had been working hard the entire time. To complete the performance, she dumped water over her own head so the wet hair would look like sweat. Their mother studied her suspiciously, failed to prove anything, and walked away. The moment she disappeared, Xiaoning started stabbing the haystack as if it were an enemy. Her muttered threats made Yi-do suspect the imaginary target was probably him. Jia Yi watched the pitchfork strike and became visibly less confident about future sister-in-law relations. Yi-do promised that Xiaoning would not dare mistreat her while he was around. Jia Yi rejected that protection. If she expected to become part of Yi-do's household, she believed family relationships were responsibilities she had to manage herself. Yi-do pointed toward the pitchfork and asked whether she had fully considered the battlefield. Jia Yi still walked forward. She told Yi-do that his responsibility was handling threats outside the home. Her responsibility would be keeping peace inside it. She also admitted that Yi-do's future might carry him into circles far above her family. If one day politics required additional marriages or alliances, she did not want insecurity to become another burden he carried. Yi-do found that acceptance uncomfortable rather than flattering. His previous modern life had taught him very different expectations about relationships. Jia Yi was not asking for status. She wanted a secure place beside him and believed being his first serious partner already mattered. Before Yi-do could turn the conversation into an argument, she kissed his cheek and went to face Xiaoning alone. Yi-do expected a confrontation. Nothing happened. Xiaoning greeted Jia Yi normally and immediately started discussing the proposed hat work. All the anger Yi-do feared had been directed at him, not Jia Yi. Xiaoning explained her own problem with teenage logic. Their mother constantly warned that daughters who contributed nothing might be married off quickly. Xiaoning wanted to prove she could earn real value inside the household. Jia Yi proposed working together on hats. Xiaoning called her foolish for volunteering to labor for the man she planned to marry. In Xiaoning's imagination, a favored wife should sit comfortably while everyone else worked. Jia Yi answered that she had chosen Yi-do precisely because she wanted to build something beside him. That response softened Xiaoning more than flattery could have. Still, the younger sister refused to surrender her own ambitions. She reminded Jia Yi that she was also her father's daughter and wanted to prove she could build a business idea herself. If her own plan failed, she would join the hat work later. They shook hands. Yi-do had prepared himself for tears, arguments, and flying tools. Instead, the two women solved the issue faster than most village chiefs solved irrigation disputes. He quietly retreated before either of them remembered he was listening. In the fields, Ye-du found his two youngest sisters wearing homemade willow hats decorated with wildflowers. They swung tiny hoes with exaggerated seriousness while beggars divided between helping and keeping watch. The children insisted they could finish the weeding without him. Ye-du ordered them to stop before the heat became dangerous. They immediately asked whether they were allowed to eat sausages Sheriff Sun had forced into their hands earlier. Ye-du used the moment to establish another rule. Officials, merchants, and rich visitors might now bring gifts because the family had become useful. The girls were never to accept anything from unfamiliar people when trusted adults were absent. Little Tiger explained that the sheriff had practically shoved the food into their arms. Ye-du accepted that exception but kept the warning. Poverty had tested his sisters one way. New status would test them another. Staying humble while hungry was easy, compared with staying humble when powerful men arrived bearing gifts. The next complication reached Ye-du before the hat plan had even become real. Wang Lao-wu's wife came running toward him with Wang Mengzi and a crowd of furious villagers behind her. Ye-du assumed Mengzi had started another fight. Instead, the teenager threw himself face down in the dirt and begged Ye-du to kill him. That was different enough to earn immediate attention. After Ye-du saved Wang family village, the residents had begun advertising another one of his businesses. They told fishermen and farmers across the region that Ye-du purchased crabs in bulk. The campaign worked. Wang Lao-wu collected nearly 500 pounds of crabs under Ye-du's name. Mengzi volunteered to escort the shipment. On the road, the group stopped at a tea stand where a beautiful young woman claimed to be the owner's new wife. Mengzi bought tea for everyone. The drink was drugged. When the men woke, the crabs were gone. The real tea shop owner and his worker were found tied behind the building. Ye-du's two youngest sisters burst into tears when they heard. They had wanted to eat crab for weeks, but never asked because they knew every catch was sold for household income. Now someone had stolen the food they had quietly dreamed about tasting. Wang Lao-wu reacted even worse. He sat on the ground repeating that he had lost Ye-du's crabs until anger finally replaced despair. Then he grabbed a brick and tried to run after thieves who were already hours away. Ye-du caught him by the collar. The tea shop owner identified the organizer as Xiao, the same resentful troublemaker from Chief Lu's village. Xiao had blamed Ye-du for farmland lost through gambling debt and had clearly been planning revenge. The trap had been organized carefully. A pretty accomplice drew attention. The tea disabled the escort, and the thieves divided their escape routes after taking the cargo. Sukan was already investigating. He found the victims, revived them, and pursued several suspects on a donkey. Because the beggar network did not exactly own cavalry, the thieves scattered. Sukan also checked Xiao's village and discovered the man's house and farmland had already been seized by moneylenders. Xiao had abandoned everything before the theft. That meant he was not planning to return home. Mengzi threatened to burn Xiao's village. Wang Lao-wu suggested kidnapping relatives and executing them until Xiao surrendered. Ye-du stopped both ideas immediately. Murdering uninvolved people was illegal, strategically useless, and far more expensive than stolen seafood. A man willing to disappear after robbing his neighbors would not return because distant relatives suffered. The real problem was reputation. Ye-du had promised local fishermen that he would buy what they delivered. If the goods vanished and Ye-du refused payment, everyone would remember the broken promise rather than the theft. He announced that every fisherman would still receive the full agreed price from his own money. The loss was painful but manageable after the bandit bounty. Sukan offered to return some of the cash Ye-du had recently given the beggars. Ye-du refused. Payment already earned did not become optional simply because another business failed. Wang Lao-wu started hitting his own head. Mengzi began slapping himself again. Ye-du ordered both men to stop trying to punish their mistakes through self-injury. More importantly, the crisis had shown him something valuable. Mengzi confessed immediately instead of hiding. Wang Lao-wu was ready to fight over Ye-du's property. Sukan dropped everything to chase the thieves. The money could be replaced. A loyal network was much harder to buy. Before that lesson could settle, Chief Lu arrived from Xiao village. The same man who had considered assassinating Ye-du that morning now looked as though his own soldiers had marched him toward execution. Retired veterans followed behind him. Mengzi grabbed a stick and charged. Young men from Wang family village picked up bricks. Chief Lu nearly turned around until one veteran pressed a sword sheath into his back and pushed him forward. His own men were forcing him to apologize. Lu bowed and admitted that Xiao came from his village. He had rounded up Xiao's relatives and brought them along. Then Lu offered Ye-du permission to beat, punish, or even kill those relatives however he wished. Ye-du understood the political trick immediately. Lu wanted to sacrifice unpopular families, settle old disputes, and sell the entire cleanup as a favor. The relatives looked half dead already because they had resisted the arrest, and the veterans had corrected them enthusiastically. They begged Yidu for mercy and promised to help catch Xiao. Yidu answered that he was a government village chief, not a bandit. Seizing innocent people's houses and killing relatives for another man's crime would violate the law. Relief moved through the group. Then Yidu added a condition. Xiao himself had committed the crime, and when he was captured, Xiao village would provide the executioner. Chief Lu would perform that duty personally according to village law. Lu froze. Killing a man from the dominant Xiao clan inside Xiao village could create a blood feud that lasted years. That would force Lu to depend on Yidu's protection afterward. Before Lu could object, his own veterans loudly announced that their chief had agreed. Lu had armed veterans behind him and armed beggars in front of him. He swallowed the trap and accepted. Yidu then turned to Xiao's relatives and proposed a debt note large enough to make every face go blank. The figure was intentionally far beyond the value of the stolen crabs. Lu stammered that it sounded excessive. Sukhan stepped forward and asked the relatives whether they had a better option. Weapons appeared around them. The relatives cursed Xiao for dragging the family into disaster and agreed to sign. Sukhan's people produced paper, ink, and brushes with suspicious efficiency. Thumbprints sealed the documents. Yidu made clear that the debt could be cancelled when Xiao was captured and dealt with. The point was not really repayment. The point was spreading a message that organized theft against Qingda village created consequences wider than one lost shipment. Sukhan understood the deterrent value immediately. After the crowd dispersed, he told Yidu that the bounty squad needed serious training before another pursuit. His information network was excellent. Its physical pursuitability was not. Yidu agreed. Far away in the mountains, Xiao remained completely unaware that his theft had transformed his entire family into collateral. He rested beside the woman who had played the false tea shop wife. She was connected to a bandit stronghold called Hidden Dragon Fortress. Xiao expected the crab robbery to impress her. She laughed at the idea. Stealing seafood did not qualify someone to command mountain bandits. She offered him a path into the fortress anyway, dangling status, wealth, and the ability to send armed men after anyone he hated. Xiao immediately started imagining revenge against Yidu and Chief Lu. The recruiter recognized how easy he was to guide. Her appearance had already defeated Mengzi's judgment at the tea stand, and Xiao was even easier to manipulate. She dressed boldly by local standards and carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to men, underestimating the danger behind a pleasant face. Xiao started talking about revenge almost before she finished explaining the fortress. He wanted Yidu dead. He wanted Chief Lu punished. He even regretted not stealing more from his own relatives before disappearing. The woman listened without sharing his excitement. Hidden Dragon Fortress did not promote people because they hated a village chief or successfully stole food. Xiao would still have to prove that he could bring money, information, recruits, or useful violence. That irritated him, but he agreed to every condition because the alternative was returning home to debt and enemies. The recruiter understood that desperation made excellent leverage. She promised that real status inside the fortress would eventually let Xiao send armed men wherever he wanted. For someone who had lost land, family standing, and dignity, the idea of commanding others became more intoxicating than the stolen crab money. His resentment, vanity, and attraction to her were doing most of the work. Yidu would not learn about Hidden Dragon Fortress yet. His attention shifted toward straw. The first hats were terrible. His hands had been shaped by weapons, security work, and military training, not delicate weaving. Several attempts looked more like damaged bird nests than products. Yidu kept practicing. Reject hats covered walls, benches, and fences. Beggars received them for free because sunlight did not care whether a hat was beautiful. At the same time, recruits began arriving for the new bounty squad. Yidu did not start with sword drills. He made them stand in formation for hours. Anyone who shifted weight, bent a knee, or broke posture met Wang Mengzi's bamboo stick. The teenager discovered a calling. He patrolled the lines with intense happiness and corrected every mistake loudly. Villagers began coming from neighboring settlements simply to watch grown men stand still while Mengzi hit them. Gossip spread almost as quickly. Yidu had stopped hunting bandits. He told nearby villages to stop reckless hunts as well. People decided he had become frightened after the crab theft. Others claimed he had gotten rich once and now spent his days weaving grass like an old woman. Meanwhile, every village that copied his bounty hunting methods was burning through food, weapons, and manpower. Some caught criminals. Others returned with injuries, and nothing to show for the expense. Everyone wanted to know Yidu's next move. When nothing visible happened, ridicule grew. Even Chu Yu sent a representative from the garrison to ask why the region's most profitable bandit hunter was sitting at home. Sukhan fed the messenger a deliberately mysterious answer. Standing formation was a revolutionary military method, and the bandits were currently hiding because too many amateurs were chasing them. Yidu was building strength for a larger strike. The messenger laughed because Yidu was still visibly surrounded by ugly straw hats. Then one of Chu Yu's older military servants picked up a reject hat and placed it on his head. His expression changed. The hat was light, breathable, cool under direct sun, and flexible enough to fold without breaking. It could serve as a fan shade or even a seat in the field. The old soldier had grown up farming and remembered summers, when sunlight burned skin raw. He told Chu Yu that farmers, laborers, and soldiers would all want something this comfortable. Chu Yu stopped laughing. Military supply contracts appeared in his imagination immediately. Thousands of soldiers trained and marched under brutal summer heat. A cheap folding sun hat could become a massive product. The fact that Yidu's rejects already worked meant the finished versions might be even better. Chu Yu decided he needed exclusive distribution before anyone else understood the opportunity. The military angle made the product much larger than a village market. Farmers might buy one hat and wear it for years. An army contract could move tens of thousands at once, replace damaged stock regularly, and introduce the design to every region soldiers pass through. Chu Yu also understood that status mattered in distribution. Ordinary merchants might struggle to sell a new rural product to officials. A Chu family name could put the same hat directly into noble courtyards and quartermaster discussions. That was the piece Yidu lacked. His system could provide knowledge and unusual materials, but it could not create local relationships out of nothing. A merchant partner with established roots could turn workshop output into regional cash far faster than Yidu, hauling bundles from market to market himself. Sukan had anticipated the raw material problem. His beggar network bought wheat stalks from villages across the region for almost nothing. Farmers considered them agricultural waste. Carts of stalks began arriving at Chinga village, while rumors still claimed Yidu had lost his mind. One of Sukan's men handled preliminary sales discussions using authorization papers from Yidu. Without asking permission, he effectively created an auction for exclusive distribution rights. Merchants came after hearing that a new product had attracted military interest. The former beggar stood in clean clothes and explained that the process was difficult to copy. Even if competitors stole the idea, mastering production would take time. He offered one buyer exclusive rights for a fixed run of 100,000 hats. The buyer would pay a licensing fee plus a substantial deposit. The crowd went silent. Chu Yu opened with 100 strings of cash. Local merchants nearly stopped breathing. Then a stranger in dark military clothing rode into the gathering on an expensive horse and doubled the offer. Chu Yu recognized him immediately and became furious. The newcomer came from another province and had no obvious reason to interfere with local hat distribution. Bidding climbed. 210 strings, 215, 220, 280. Then the outsider casually offered 300. Chu Yu calculated every asset he could liquidate and realized the stranger had deeper pockets. Yidu was brought over after the bidding became impossible to ignore. He had expected perhaps 50 strings for distribution rights. The auction had already multiplied that assumption. He reminded everyone that this was a binding commercial contract. If a buyer failed to sell the hats, Chinga village would not refund the licensing payment. That warning did not slow the stranger. The outsider pushed the price to 500 strings. Nobody followed. 500,000 copper coins for exclusive rights to a product not yet in full production was absurd on its face. The farmers watching the auction reacted with a different kind of horror. Days earlier, many had sold wheat stalks to Sukan's beggars for tiny amounts because the material seemed worthless. Now rich men were bidding sums equal to enormous areas of farmland for the right to sell what those stalks became. Several villagers immediately decided they had been cheated. Others cursed themselves for not hoarding every stalk in sight. The truth was less magical than it looked. The raw material remained cheap. Value came from processing, design, organized labor, distribution, and the fact that nobody else could yet reproduce the full production chain. Sukan had recognized that difference early and quietly purchased enough supply to prevent sudden shortages. Chu Yu's desperation also had reasons beyond profit. He came from a powerful clan but only a branch line, and political trouble had already pushed him into this distant post. Family support was shrinking. Money spent buying military credit could not continue forever. An exclusive commercial connection to Yidu offered a path toward independent income and influence. Losing the auction, therefore, felt like losing both a business and a lifeline. Yidu could see that calculation in the nobleman's face. The outsider's behavior still made less economic sense. A rational distributor might gamble heavily on a promising product. 500 strings before final production suggested a second product was being purchased at the same time. Yidu immediately concluded the hats were not the true objective. The stranger wanted access to him. Chu Yu privately warned that the man came from Hunan province and had been causing friction with the local garrison. Yidu still required a deposit and proper paperwork. An outsider could not simply promise 500 strings and ride away. The young commander placed 50 strings down as a non-refundable deposit and took the contract to review. Then he carried a sample hat toward an old Taoist priest sleeping under a tree. The priest examined both contract and product. He thought 100,000 hats might actually be too few. Drought had turned the summer sun into a daily enemy, and field workers would buy comfortable protection if distribution reached them. But the priest admitted the hats were not why he had encouraged such a huge bid. He pointed toward Yidu's recruits. The young commander saw farmers standing in formation and dismissed the scene as basic drilling. Priest told him to look again. 2 weeks earlier, those men had been ordinary villagers. Now their posture matched, their eyes held focus, and their movements followed commands together. Wang Mengzi called a turn. The entire line snapped around almost simultaneously. The commander compared them to veterans in his own force. Some professional soldiers carried years of bad posture and inconsistent discipline. Yidu's farmers already looked cleaner in formation. The priest argued that the training method itself could be worth more than the hat contract. The young commander finally understood. He belonged to the Invincible Flying Army, an elite expeditionary unit pursuing dangerous Liang Mountain bandits across provincial lines. Their first pursuit had failed. Yidu had accidentally solved part of that failure by killing one bandit group near Wang family village. A larger force was believed to be hiding around Phoenix Mountain and recruiting new men. If the flying army failed again, the commander's career could collapse, and the unit's reputation would suffer. He had roughly 1 month before senior command lost patience. The commander admitted that time was now a bigger problem than money. The old priest believed Yidu's small trained squad could change the coming fight when combined with flying army veterans. The second problem was funding. The huge hat deposit had consumed money they also needed for bounties and rewards. The commander offered to sell personal farmland earned through military service. The priest rejected that sacrifice. He had a cheaper idea. Chu Yu was sitting nearby nursing his humiliation. Yidu invited him to tea because losing an auction did not erase the value of a powerful local partner. Chu Yu pretended not to care. He also understood that his aggressive bidding had helped Yidu raise the price, which created a small favor between them. While drinking, Chu Yu identified the stranger as a lieutenant colonel in the Invincible Flying Army. He also guessed correctly that 500 strings were intended to purchase Yidu's goodwill, not merely hats. The young commander returned and heard enough to accuse Chu Yu of bad-mouthing him. Chu Yu snapped back. Then the commander offered something unexpected. He would transfer Chu Yu into the Invincible Flying Army at equivalent rank and include a military achievement. Chu Yu stopped arguing. Nobody gave away a valuable transfer without wanting something larger. The old priest joined the conversation. Chu Yu mocked his filthy robe and questioned whether a ragged Taoist attached to the flying army deserved respect. Priest answered physically. He stepped forward with internal power, strong enough for Yidu to feel from several paces away. Chu Yu punched back. One impact dislocated his arm. The priest kicked him away and asked whether he was ready to speak seriously. Chu Yu accused the elder of bullying a junior and demanded someone at least repair the damage. Yidu rotated the arm back into place with one controlled movement. He told Chu Yu that a full strength strike from the priest would have destroyed the joint rather than dislocated it. The priest then revealed the real subject. He suspected Chu Yu had discovered information about Liang Mountain bandits hiding at Phoenix Mountain. Chu Yu went pale. The priest smiled because the reaction confirmed what had originally been only a guess. That annoyed Chu Yu more than the injury. He had accidentally surrendered valuable intelligence without being asked directly. The priest argued that a target that large was beyond Chu Yu's ability to exploit alone. The flying army should take over the operation. Yidu stepped in before the negotiation became one-sided. If the target was truly that large, the flying army also lacked enough local support to swallow it alone. The young commander finally admitted the truth. His expedition was far from home, low on men, short on supplies, and under pressure to produce results. That was why his unit was throwing money at Yidu's business and training methods. Yidu appreciated the direct answer. He asked why he should choose an exhausted outside army over Captain Lei Kui's local garrison. The young commander immediately insulted the garrison as washed-up officers who bought military credit instead of earning it. Priest Wang tugged his sleeve desperately. Chu Yu almost exploded because the insult included him. Yidu stopped the argument with a cough and defended Chu Yu as a valuable business partner. Chu Yu straightened proudly. Then Yidu added that Chu Yu was valuable, mainly because he was extremely rich. The statement should have insulted him. Instead, Chu Yu looked pleased to be considered useful. The commander changed tactics. He offered the goodwill of the invincible flying army. Yidu refused. He wanted money. Both commander and priest paused because almost nobody rejected the prestige of their unit so casually. Yidu then proposed an arrangement that served his longer interests. The flying army would transfer exclusive hat distribution rights to Chu Yu. Chu Yu would enter their unit, represent the distribution business, and become the bridge between Yidu's local operation and the expeditionary force. The flying army had already paid the licensing fee. Chu Yu and Yidu would handle the actual profitable business. The commander realized he was effectively funding a partnership he would not control. He wanted to refuse. Priest Wang accepted before pride destroyed the opportunity. In his view, 500 strings mattered less than a durable relationship with a man who could train soldiers, kill dangerous outlaws, and build profitable systems from trash. The commander swallowed his anger. Chu Yu looked as though a winning lottery ticket had fallen into his lap. He admitted he did not actually want to join the flying army. Yidu cheerfully agreed that he was not especially impressive as a soldier. Then Chu Yu finally understood his role. Flying army officers also needed military credit, equipment, and commercial channels. He could become Yidu's inside man, while controlling a product the unit already wanted. That made him difficult to discard. Yidu told him to focus on selling hats and leave the military politics alone. The agreement ended with one deadline. In 10 days, Yidu's people would march with the flying army toward Phoenix Mountain. The commander left with Priest Wang still visibly irritated. The old priest walked away calm. He understood that the deal only looked like a loss if someone measured value in cash, instead of future leverage. With the alliance settled, Yidu concentrated on the two systems he actually trusted. Production needed to scale, and the bounty squad needed to become real soldiers instead of enthusiastic farmers. For the second problem, he had something nobody in the century could imagine. Yidu spent 50 strings through the merchant system and bought a cheap surveillance drone. The machine was mostly cardboard, simple electronics, a camera, extra batteries, and stubborn modern engineering. In his previous life, devices like this were disposable tools for armies too poor to waste expensive aircraft on every scouting mission. In this world, it was close to supernatural. Mountain reconnaissance normally required men to crawl through dangerous terrain and physically observe enemy positions. Scouts could be captured, misled, or killed before returning. Even Yidu's own eyes could only see one slope at a time. The drone could map roads, camps, escape routes, streams, supply trails, and movement from above without exposing a single scout. Assembly took less than half an hour. Yidu launched it over Chinga village for a test. The handheld screen immediately gave him a clear overhead picture of rooftops, fields, lanes, workshops, and people moving through courtyards. The view was so detailed that Yidu quickly learned where not to point the camera during private household routines. He treated that discovery as another security rule and turned the drone toward open land. Battery life was more than sufficient for the mission ahead. His entire approach to mountain warfare had just changed. At home, the family's food improved as quickly as the business. Shower-cooked rice and a heavy pot of pork ribs, while the younger sisters attacked dinner with astonishing efficiency. 2 bowls of rice disappeared into each child, followed by meat and fruit. Yidu briefly wondered whether their small bodies contained hidden storage dimensions. His mother ate less. The crab theft and village gossip had frightened her more than she admitted. People were saying Yidu had lost momentum, become distracted by hats, and allowed thieves to embarrass him publicly. She asked whether there were any new leads. Yidu rubbed her shoulders and told her small criminals eventually resurfaced. Men who stole for quick money usually spent quickly, bragged carelessly, and exposed themselves. There was no reason to panic. He had also upgraded the family's sleeping mats with woven bamboo that made the hot nights easier. His mother told him he did not have to carry every worry alone. Yidu appreciated the offer, but the coming Phoenix Mountain operation occupied his mind more than Xiao's stolen crabs. Between training sessions, he continued helping the Wang family repair their courtyard and taught Jia Yi the basics of straw weaving. She learned slowly but refused to complain. Outside the village, gossip grew louder because people could not see what Yidu was building. Some recruits' families asked why husbands and sons were still standing in camp instead of collecting bounties. Others mocked villagers who had hoarded wheat stalks expecting Yidu to buy at inflated prices. When full production did not begin immediately, those speculators watched their piles rot and blamed Yidu for their own gamble. Wang Laowu's wife, Lin Shimei, became nervous enough to ask Shoer whether the hat business was real. Shoer answered with complete faith. She had worn the hats, found them comfortable, and believed her brother knew exactly what he was doing. The evidence was limited, the loyalty was not. Lin Shimei tried one. The change in her face was immediate. The hat stayed cool in sunlight, weighed almost nothing, and smelled faintly of dry wheat instead of hot bamboo. For a woman working in exposed fields during drought, the difference was enormous. Her concern shifted instantly from whether Yidu's business would fail to whether she could get a job. Wang family village was starving. Her husband rarely explained what happened around Yidu's operations, and sewing jobs from wealthy households were irregular. A workshop offering regular wages and meals sounded almost impossible. Shower vouched for her. Yidu accepted the recommendation. Word escaped within hours. Women from villages across walking distance began using family connections, gifts, and direct begging to seek workshop places. Yidu had Sukan's men build long grass roof sheds with bamboo walls. Inside, workers sat on mats in separate stations. Each station handled only one part of the process. That separation increased speed and made theft of the complete technique much harder. Yidu did not accept every applicant. Some hands were quick and precise. Others needed the time required for 10 hats to finish one. He paid for labor, not attendance. Slow workers were redirected towards simpler jobs when possible. Some husbands dragged women home after discovering they worked outside the household. Yidu intervened when violence happened directly in front of him, but he could not control every marriage in the region. His mother found a compromise for women who were forbidden to work at the workshop. Basic preparation could be done at home for smaller wages. Even 20 copper coins a day meant porridge for children who might otherwise eat nothing. The amount looked small beside Yidu's military deals. But village families measured money differently. A few coins decided whether a child ate thin soup or nothing. Regular work also meant women could plan instead of waiting for charity or a husband's uncertain earnings. That reliability changed how households talked about Chinga village. At first, people came because they were desperate. Soon they came because workers already inside the sheds described white rice, meat soup, pickled vegetables, shade, and wages paid without being cheated. Some women quietly saved part of their meals to take home for children. Yidu noticed but did not make a public issue of it, as long as workshop supplies remained under control. He wanted productive workers, not guards measuring every mouthful of food. The harder problem came from demand. Every available position attracted several applicants, and family connections quickly turned hiring into local politics. Yidu refused to let the workshop become another place where powerful households captured every opportunity. Skill and reliability mattered more than surname. That rule angered people accustomed to buying favors, but it made the production floor stronger. That homework became fiercely popular. Jiayi also found her position change. Women who once criticized her now visited Mother Wang's clinic carrying small gifts and hoping she might recommend them for employment. Jiayi refused to interfere with hiring simply because someone flattered her. The extra traffic still benefited the clinic. Mother Wang divided her time between the Newtown pharmacy and the village practice, busier and happier than she had been in years. Then Xiuning cornered Jiayi. She demanded to know why Yidu was hiring women from outside Chinga village. In Xiuning's view, outsiders would steal the technique and create competing workshops. Jiayi answered that hard-working women needed food, regardless of which village they came from. Xiuning grabbed her hands and insisted that a future wife should warn her husband about business risks. Jiayi became visibly nervous at the idea of interfering with Yidu's decisions. She believed supporting him meant avoiding unnecessary control over his work. Xiuning found that loyalty adorable and completely useless for the current problem. She demanded Yidu's location. Jiayi admitted he had escaped workshop arguments and gone to the training camp. They marched there together. Wang Mengzi blocked the entrance with a spear before recognizing Xiuning and reluctantly letting them through. They found Yidu reclining sideways in a chair with tea in one hand. Xiuning had spent days defending his reputation and worrying about the business. Seeing him relaxed almost made smoke come out of her ears. She opened her mouth to yell and discovered family hierarchy still had enough power to stop the first insult. Yidu calmly asked what she wanted. Xiuning demanded a real answer about industrial theft. She had watched him long enough to learn basic hat weaving herself. If a teenager could copy visible movements, professional merchants could do the same. Yidu admitted the observation was fair and took both women to the main production area. 2 retired soldiers from Xiao village guarded the gate. One had damaged hearing and the other had poor sight. But together they were painfully strict. No identification badge meant no entry. They had denied Xiuning several times before, which she considered a personal insult. Every worker carried a printed portrait badge Yidu secretly produced through the merchant system. Villagers assumed an extraordinary painter must be working somewhere behind the scenes. Inside, Xiuning finally saw the whole operation. 4 preparation stages happened before weaving even began. Stalks were processed, split, treated, bleached, and dyed through separate stations. Several chemical mixtures came directly from Yidu's system catalog. Local craftsmen had no way to reproduce them by observation alone. The weaving process was separated again into multiple techniques. No ordinary worker learned the whole chain. A woman stolen by competitors might know one stage and nothing about the rest. Xiuning realized the hats she had copied used materials Yi Du already prepared for her. She had learned one visible section and mistaken it for the complete craft. She refused to surrender the argument entirely. Competitors could still copy finished shapes and sell lower-quality hats cheaply. Yi Du said that was acceptable. If rivals reached the current design, he would release better designs and make the imitation obsolete. His modern memories contained far more variations than the workshop currently used. The current method was intentionally simple. Xiuning's eyes widened as the scale became clear. She began imagining a much larger workshop than other products using the same trained hands. Rain capes, woven bags, shade screens, and future textile work could all follow. Yedu smiled. Her thinking resembled factories he remembered guarding in his previous life. Rows of workers, divided tasks, repeatable processes, and supervisors measuring output. Qinghe village was still far from that level. Capital, supply chains rules, transports, and management would become larger problems as the workshop grew. Yi Du reminded Xiuning that she once claimed she could build something better than her brother's business. She immediately accused the younger sisters of quoting her out of context. The denial came too quickly to be convincing. Then she revealed the real reason she had pushed so hard. Yi Du was trying to train soldiers while personally supervising hundreds of women. Jia Yi was kind enough to motivate people, but too gentle to discipline habitual troublemakers. Xiuning wanted the management job. Yi Du reminded her that their mother still chased her with a broom several times a week. Xiuning said surviving their mother was excellent management training. Workers only required shouting. If shouting failed, she suggested stronger correction. Yi Du had intended to involve her eventually, but he wanted more than confidence. He asked for an actual structure. Xiuning surprised him. She proposed dividing workers into 10 zones with roughly equal staffing. She and Jia Yi would each oversee half. Every zone would elect a team leader responsible for ordinary disputes and daily progress. Only unresolved problems would reach senior management. Output would be recorded by team, compared week by week, and used to identify weak stations. Jia Yi would handle praise, bonuses, morale, and personal concerns. Xiuning would handle discipline, deadlines, and standards. One sister-in-law would become the soft hand. The other would become the stick. Yi Du stared at her longer than she liked. The plan was rough but remarkably advanced for a teenager in a rural famine district. Delegation, elected middle management, output tracking, and divided roles could actually work. He offered her a salary. Xiuning refused instantly. She said family members did not need to charge their own household for labor. Then she insulted Yi Du for being rich enough to run a workshop, but still too cheap to build Jia Yi a proper home. The respectful manager disappeared as soon as Xiuning realized she had the job. Her usual attitude returned at full strength. Yi Du muttered that younger sisters were supposed to behave like loyal family allies. Instead, he had raised a feral cat. Xiuning grabbed Jia Yi and started walking away for private discussion. When Yi Du demanded to know what they were plotting, she looked back without concern. If she punched a hole in the sky, she said, her big brother would simply have to repair it. Yi Du could not even argue. Once Xiuning and Jia Yi took over workshop management, production rose quickly. Finished inventory began filling storage rooms. Yi Du was finally free to move into the training camp full-time. Standing formation had only been phase 1. Now the recruits entered physical conditioning. Yi Du believed pain without recovery created injured men, not soldiers. He fed them beef whenever possible and quietly used modern supplements from the merchant system. Creatine supported recovery. Energy substances helped them survive the brutal training volume. Yi Du created different programs according to each man's body, rather than forcing identical work on everyone. He recorded progress daily. Failure brought correction, not speeches. Some men quit. Some broke under the routine. Others simply ran home. Out of roughly 30 recruits, 18 survived the full selection. Those 18 changed dramatically. Their speed increased. Their posture hardened. Their reactions became cleaner. More importantly, they had learned to obey as a group, rather than move like 18 separate villagers. Yi Du documented nutrition, drills, fatigue, injuries, and performance because future squads would need a repeatable system. The first unit was an experiment. The notes would become doctrine. On the 10th day, Yi Du ordered a rest period inside camp. Then he treated himself to something from the system no local cook could match. Hot pot, thin premium beef, lamb tripe, vegetables, rich broth, and other ingredients covered the table. In a famine region where people chewed bark, the sight was almost offensive. Chu Yu arrived at exactly the wrong moment for his dignity. He stared at the food like a nobleman, discovering he had been poor his entire life. Before Chu could invent an excuse to sit down, Yi-Du called toward a nearby tree. Wang Mengzi stepped out. The boy had been hiding and watching. Yi-Du invited him to eat. Mengzi sat, but touched nothing. He finally asked why he had not been chosen for the Phoenix Mountain mission. Yi-Du put down his chopsticks. Phoenix Mountain sat near a county border with steep terrain and uncertain enemy positions. The Liang Mountain bandits had already fought through organized government troops. This was not another village brawl. Mengzi argued that Yi-Du had killed more than 30 bandits alone. Yi-Du reminded him that several hundred enemies were not simply 30 repeated many times. Numbers changed movement, exhaustion, encirclement, ammunition, and the chance of one random arrow ending everything. Mengzi was an only son. If he died, Yi-Du would have to face the father whose family line ended with him. The boy's expression hardened. He accused Yi-Du of treating him like a useless child. Mengzi wanted a life bigger than farming and inherited village status. He wanted to become a real soldier. Yi-Du stared until the teenager's body began reacting to the pressure. Mengzi's knees shook, but he stayed upright. Yi-Du asked whether he truly understood battle. Young men imagined legendary generals and heroic charges. Most battlefield deaths belonged to nameless soldiers nobody wrote songs about. One arrow could erase years of dreams in less than a second. Courage was not screaming and running forward while angry. Real courage meant understanding exactly how frightening death was, and moving anyway because the objective demanded it. Mengzi went quiet. Yi-Du asked a harder question. Why should he invest time, money, equipment, and knowledge into this particular teenager? Admiration was not payment. Enthusiasm was not value. What could Mengzi eventually contribute that justified mentorship? That question hurt more than the earlier criticism. The boy had been assuming loyalty alone entitled him to teaching. Yi-Du looked toward Chu Yu and used him as an example. A great family name could attract endless flattery, but flattery did not produce competence. Chu Yu froze with meat halfway to his mouth and looked offended. He could not honestly disagree. Then Chu Yu joined the lesson. He described famous officials who had copied books until their hands cracked and served teachers for years before receiving serious instruction. He described generals who spent a decade proving loyalty before masters shared core strategy. These were princes, nobles, and future ministers. Mengzi was a farmer's son with no money, rank, or inherited network. Chu Yu asked why the boy believed 5 minutes of determination should purchase what powerful men spent years earning. Mengzi dropped to his knees. He struck his forehead against the ground again and again until blood appeared. Yi-Du ordered him to stop. Mengzi refused until he had sworn clearly. He would no longer treat Yi-Du as an admired older brother. He asked to become a student. If accepted, he would obey, work, and prove his worth over time, rather than demand secrets immediately. The seriousness in his eyes reminded Yi-Du of his own military past in this body. The original Yi-Du had taken a father's place in the army and survived years of fighting Turk forces. His old master had tested promising soldiers by giving them small squads and sending them into real danger. Most candidates died. A few survived through ability, discipline, judgment, and luck. True military knowledge was expensive because mistakes were paid in bodies. Yi-Du finally told Mengzi to stand. He would teach him. But once the relationship changed, Yi-Du would stop protecting the boy's pride. Orders in battle would be obeyed immediately. Mengzi accepted without hesitation. Chu Yu called him an apprentice rather than a true disciple, and warned that earning deeper instruction would take much longer. Instead of sulking, Mengzi said he would prove himself until nobody could deny him. That answer impressed Chu Yu enough to silence the teasing. Yi-Du still had no intention of handing over advanced strategy. Mengzi would receive foundational tactics, combat discipline, and enough knowledge to stay alive while showing whether greater talent existed. Core command theory would come only after years of proof. Yi-Du reached beneath his chair and produced a modern stab-resistant vest. The black material was light, flexible, and completely alien to local weaving. Mengzi put it on. Chu Yu immediately drew a dagger and tested it before anyone could stop him. The blade failed to penetrate. Chu Yu stared as though the vest were legendary golden silk armor. Yi-Du had spent 10,000 coins on the item. It was expensive, but Mengzi was now going to Phoenix Mountain. One lucky knife could end the lesson permanently. The vest was life insurance. Mengzi knelt again, this time in gratitude rather than desperation. Yi-Du allowed the gesture to land once. Then Chu Yu began staring at the vest with open envy. Yi-Du told him not to compete with a teenager. If Chu Yu managed their partnership well, Yi-Du might eventually give him something even more valuable, perhaps even a firearm. Chu Yu had seen what Yi-Du's shotgun did to train bandits. His entire attitude changed. He bowed deeply and promised that Yi-Du's business would be treated as his own. Mengzi watched Chu family noble bow to his teacher and finally understood that Yidu's status could not be measured by village titles. The night before departure, the workshop remained bright with oil lamps. Women worked through organized shifts while Xiuning and Jiayi kept production moving. Wages, meals, and reliable work had returned laughter to a village that recently expected starvation. Sukan doubled patrols because success also attracted thieves. The 18 trained bounty fighters helped secure roads and storage. Men rejected from the combat squad still followed Yidu looking for another chance. He redirected them towards Sukan's logistics work until a future selection opened. One local thug tried recruiting several rejects to raid Chinga village for loot. They beat him unconscious instead. Failure to make the elite squad had not weakened their loyalty. That night, Yidu's mother came looking for him. He expected another argument about danger. Instead, she led him to the village cemetery. Women who died without husbands or surviving families rested there in graves that received little attention from anyone else. His mother took out a jade amulet. Yidu's father had once received it from a temple and left it with her as a protective charm. She placed it in Yidu's hand. He tried to return it because it was one of the few physical memories she had of her husband. She refused. She rarely left home. Yidu was the one marching toward Bandit Mountains. If the charm carried any protection at all, she wanted it around his neck. He put it on. Then she asked what he was actually building. When Yidu returned from the army, he had claimed he was finished with dangerous campaigns. Now he trained fighters, ran workshops, negotiated with officials, and prepared to fight again. Yidu admitted there was no grand plan hidden behind everything. He wanted his mother and sisters to live well. The famine world did not allow weak households to remain safe, simply because they wished to be left alone. If Chinga village stayed small and defenseless, a stronger force would eventually eat it. Yidu did not know how far he would climb. He promised only that he would not gamble his life carelessly. His family needed him alive. His mother heard one part of that answer more clearly than the rest. The family also needed an heir. She ordered Yidu to return from the mountains and give her a grandson. Yidu nearly choked. His mother considered his embarrassment proof that the conversation was necessary. For one final night before war, the argument made the cemetery feel less frightening. At dawn, Yidu joined the larger expedition in town. Only then did he learn more about Lieutenant Colonel Quan Ying, the young commander who had paid so aggressively for the hat rights. Quan Ying came from a powerful family with Korean roots that had assimilated into Chinese political and military life over generations. His father stood high within that clan, and Quan Ying himself had earned battlefield decorations on the northern frontier. He was handsome, connected, ambitious, and accustomed to being recognized in major cities. In the remote Sanzhou region, many villagers had no idea why his surname mattered. His expeditionary force was still impressive. Roughly 500 flying army soldiers formed the corps, supported by attendants and specialists. Yidu brought his 18 selected fighters, Sukan scouts, Little Tiger, Wang Mengzi, and support personnel. Chu Yu arrived with retainers. Combined strength reached several hundred more than Yidu would ever have assembled alone. Quan Ying noticed Sukan and Little Tiger in Yidu's group and immediately frowned. He asked why beggars were joining a military operation. Chu Yu answered before Yidu bothered. These were Yidu's chosen scouts, men who had already collected mountain intelligence, while richer people were still discussing maps. Quan Ying looked toward Yidu for confirmation. Yidu gave him none. The commander could either observe properly or keep judging by clothes. To his credit, Quan Ying looked again. Sukan's eyes constantly moved across roads, trees, faces, and side paths. Little Tiger carried heavy gear over rough ground without slowing. Priest Wang studied them and admitted the first impression had been wrong. Then the priest examined Yidu's 18 fighters. The transformation bothered him even more. Only days earlier they had been farmers learning how to stand. Now they moved through broken terrain in a compact formation with matching pace. Their posture stayed stable even when the road narrowed. Spies reported that Yidu fed them meat at nearly every meal and gave them strange recovery drinks. Priest Wang considered the diet absurdly expensive. Even elite flying army soldiers did not receive meat 3 times a day. He assumed Yidu was spoiling recruits through wealth rather than following a deliberate recovery plan. Yidu had no reason to correct him. The force marched hard until reaching a roadside station. Fancy carriages were already parked nearby. Young nobles gathered under parasols, writing poetry on a public board and treating dangerous countryside like a social excursion. When they saw Quan Ying, they rushed toward him. Yidu asked why civilians were being allowed near the column. Chu Yu answered that these were useful admirers from local families. Quan Ying had no intention of pushing away people who could clear roads, open warehouses, or influence officials. The strategy proved practical. As the expedition crossed into another county, Noble connections arranged food, water, lodgings, and access to local resources. A magistrate's son named young Master Su became especially eager. He used government grain stores to support the march and hired the best available cooks for the rest station. Chuyu mocked the spectacle. To him, a military operation surrounded by rich poetry lovers looked ridiculous. Wang Mengzi started agreeing. You do shut that lesson down. Moving hundreds of soldiers through someone else's territory made real stealth nearly impossible. Kuan Ying's loud progress gained supplies and local cooperation, while encouraging enemies to underestimate him as a spoiled aristocrat. That could be deliberate misdirection rather than incompetence. Mengzi nodded and filed away the lesson. Chu Yu looked less comfortable because he had missed it. At the formal meal, Kuan Yin sat among local elites wearing polished robes and expensive accessories. He spoke about politics and poetry while the county magistrate poured wine. Yi Du's group received a rough eating space outside with ordinary food. Chu Yu bit into a disappointing piece of pork and complained about branch family status. Kuan Yin belonged to a main military line and therefore received treatment Chu Yu's disgraced branch could not demand. Yi Du told him that borrowing a grandfather's reputation was not the same as building one personally. He also ignored most of the food. The merchant system had ruined his tolerance for mediocre medieval cooking. Then Kuan Yin approached their table carrying a wine cup. In front of the noble audience, he praised Yi Du's contribution and promised to report military achievements fairly. The gesture looked respectful. Yi Du nearly stood to return the toast. Chu Yu quietly tugged his sleeve. Yi Du caught a tiny flicker of mockery in Kuan Ying's expression. The commander was performing humility for the audience, while expecting a low-ranking village chief to feel honored by attention from a great family. Yi Du remained seated. He said he did not drink weak wine. Instead, he opened a bottle of powerful modern liquor from his system inventory. The room went quiet. Local nobles considered their ceremonial wine exceptional. One famous regional brew traced its reputation back through old imperial stories. Young Master Su took Yi Du's comment personally. He approached with aristocratic confidence and explained the prestige, aroma, history, and craftsmanship of the local wine. Yedu repeated that he did not drink weak liquor. He was not insulting the history. He was describing his preference. To everyone else, the distinction sounded even more offensive. Su's father coughed from across the room, signaling his son not to turn Kuan Ying's banquet into a childish dispute. Young Master Su swallowed his temper. Then he demanded a taste of Yi Du's supposedly superior drink. Yi Du poured a bowl. Su swallowed it in one heroic motion. His face changed almost immediately. Confidence became confusion. Confusion became violent heat. His skin turned red, his body stiffened, and he collapsed onto the floor. Guards drew swords. Several people shouted that Yi Du had poisoned the magistrate's son. Then Su spoke from the ground. He called the liquor incredible. Swords stopped halfway through their arcs. The young noble lay flat on his back, smiling through the burn and praising the strongest drink he had ever tasted. Nobody knew how to respond. Yi Du calmly took his own sip. Even Kuan Yin stared at the bottle with new caution. After the banquet, Chu Yu warned that publicly embarrassing a magistrate's son could create political enemies. Yi Du did not care enough to flatter people who expected submission simply because of family rank. Drought, border threats, and internal disorder made experienced fighters valuable. His skills provided more protection than a rural title ever would. Later that night, Yi Du noticed something more important than the banquet. Kuan Yin had appeared heavily drunk when saying farewell to the nobles. The moment they left, his posture changed. His eyes sharpened. He personally inspected sentries, patrol routes, and camp security with Priest Wang. The drunken arrogance had been another performance. Chu Yu reluctantly admitted that heirs surviving inside major families were rarely simple. The next day, heat pressed down like a physical weight. Kuan Yin chose a tree-lined route and issued straw hats to much of his force. Chu Yu could barely contain his satisfaction. The same commander who once treated the product as an excuse to reach Yedu now had soldiers wearing it under real campaign conditions. Yedu told him to focus on surviving before calculating profit. They reached 7 Mile Ford below Six Dragon Ridge. The terrain ahead consisted of overlapping mountain ridges, abandoned upper fields, narrow tracks, and thick vegetation. It was ideal territory for anyone who wanted to disappear or ambush pursuers. Young Master Su arrived again with friends, servants, and private soldiers. Other nobles brought their own armed retainers. Together, the wealthy tourists added roughly 300 fighters to the expedition. Chu Yu immediately sensed something wrong. The flying army had claimed to possess scouts and prior intelligence. Why bring local guides and private armies if the target were simply a bandit camp? Yi Du asked him to consider the numbers. No sensible noble would bet his life on Yi Du's 18 fighters against hundreds of criminals. Kuan Yin had been gathering backup through social connections during the march. The noble children were not only spectators. Their household troops were reinforcement. Chu Yu realized the flying army was less dependent on Yi Du than he had imagined. They had already paid him, and keeping him nearby was safer than allowing a capable local operator to move independently. Yi Du saw another possibility. This much force seemed excessive for ordinary wanted heads. If several armed groups were converging on Six Dragon Ridge, something there might be worth more than the official bounty. That possibility interested his merchant instincts immediately. The expedition hired an old mountain guide for 50 coins and a promise of farmland. The guide proved useful quickly. He recognized terrain changes and hidden paths professional soldiers overlooked because they did not grow up there. While attention stayed on the guide, Yedu launched the cardboard drone. The tiny craft disappeared above the trees. Video streamed to the screen hidden with Yedu's equipment. For the first time, he could compare human scouting reports against a complete overhead view. That evening, Kuan Ying's camp was arranged professionally. Priest Wang chose defensible ground, established sentries, and organized logistics with experienced efficiency. Military cooks prepared meat stew that smelled genuinely good. Then Yidu noticed the petty part of the plan. Food was distributed to flying army soldiers, noble retainers, and allied guests. None came to Yidu's 18 fighters, Chu Yu's men, or Yidu himself. Chu Yu produced dried meat and complained. Mengzi's stomach growled loudly, but the boy refused to look toward the feast. Yidu had been studying drone images and almost missed the insult. Across camp, Kuan Yin laughed with young Master Su as though Yidu's group did not exist. The message was obvious. Deep in the mountains, there were no restaurants or markets. A hungry partner eventually became a subordinate asking for food. Su Kan had already solved his own dinner problem. He wandered toward the Su household cooks, invented a distant family connection, and talked them into giving him pig intestines and unwanted organ meat. He and Little Tiger roasted everything over a small fire with perfect happiness. Noble youths laughed at the sight. They whispered that Kuan Yin had finally shown the village chief his proper status. Some concluded Yidu was only a useful tool who would be discarded after the bandits died. Yidu stopped respecting Kuan Yin quite as much. The food denial was too small-minded for a commander trying to build a serious alliance. Worse, Sukan receiving scraps created a convenient excuse. If Yidu complained later, Kuan Yin could claim food had been available to anyone willing to ask properly. Yidu opened his pack. Modern canned meat and compressed biscuits appeared. His men ate the dry biscuits with water and discovered how quickly the dense food filled their stomachs. Then Yedu heated canned meat over the fire. The smell changed Sukan's priorities instantly. One taste convinced him to abandon the roasted intestines he had been praising minutes earlier. Chuyu asked whether these were secret military rations. Yidu told him to eat and stop asking questions he could not safely answer. On Kuan Ying's side, young Master Su predicted that hunger would break Yidu's pride after several days. Priest Wang was the only one who noticed the target camp looked completely comfortable. A strange meat aroma reached him, but he could not identify the source. Nobody investigated. They assumed morning would prove whose resources mattered. After most of the camp slept, Yidu's real work began. He drew terrain in the dirt and walked Chu Yu and Mengzi through tactical analysis. Enemy positions were still incomplete, but ridges, water access, movement corridors, and possible retreats could already be discussed. Mengzi understood only part of the lesson. His concentration was so intense that Yidu could almost see his brain overheating. Chu Yu absorbed much more. Principles that had felt disconnected during earlier military service began fitting together. Yidu considered most of it elementary. His previous modern life had included endless interest in military history, documentaries, and strategy games. In this world, even basic modern analytical habits could feel advanced. The march continued for 3 days. Noble participants slowed everyone dramatically on steep trails. A route hardened troops might cover quickly became a procession of rest stops. Kuan Yin tolerated the delay because he needed their private soldiers. Yidu repeatedly sent patrols away from camp. Other officers assumed the men were foraging. The patrols really provided cover for drone launches. By the 3rd day, Yidu had mapped most of Six Dragon Ridge from above. Paths, abandoned structures, suspicious clearings, fortified points, and movement patterns filled his private notes. The expedition then reached deeper mountains, where the old guide suddenly stopped. He dropped to the ground and refused to move farther. The man kowtowed and begged to turn back. Most commanders dismissed him as a frightened peasant. Yidu did not. Old mountain residents survived because they recognized danger before outsiders did. His drone screen supported the fear. The terrain ahead narrowed into ambush corridors with high firing positions on both sides. Priest Wang and Kuan Yin still pushed forward. Then metal clanging echoed ahead. It was not the sound of soldiers attacking bandits. Government troops were fighting government troops. Yedu moved toward the disturbance and found a standoff at a narrow pass. Dead bandit scouts already lay on the ground. Flying army forward units occupied one side. Sanjo's local garrison defense force held the other. Vice Commander Zhang, a member of a prestigious family, stood General Hai Yan and a group of hardened soldiers. The moment Zhang saw Chu Yu, his anger exploded. He accused Chu Yu of betraying local military interests by leading outsiders towards Sanjo's bounty targets. Chu Yu's face went red. His transfer into the flying army made the accusation difficult to deny. He quietly explained the officers to Yidu. General Hai Yan commanded the local garrison force. Vice Commander Zhang was another politically displaced noble who had ended up serving far from court. Their blood-stained armor and weapon handling told Yidu more than the titles. These men personally fought. They were not decorative officers buying all of their achievements. Chu Yu attempted diplomacy. He argued that the flying army possessed Ministry of War authority to pursue the Liang Mountain fugitives across jurisdictions. Zhang laughed. He had recently heard about Chu Yu's transfer and originally planned to congratulate him. Now he considered the man a traitor who had sold his own garrison's opportunity to outsiders. Yidu understood what had happened. Kuan Ying's highly visible march had attracted local military attention as effectively as it attracted noble supporters. Sanjo forces had rushed into the mountains to secure targets before the flying army claimed them. Two government factions were now competing for the same bandit credit. Kuan Yin stepped forward and invoked central authorization. He warned anyone blocking an imperial mission to move aside. The local commanders looked at his polished armor and responded with open contempt. They asked about his relationship to senior commanders and mocked his rank. Noble youths immediately began defending Kuan Ying's great family name. Vice Commander Zhang responded with a deliberate ethnic insult about the family's Korean origin. Kuan Ying's controlled expression finally broke. His ancestors had spent generations rising from displaced outsiders into military aristocracy. The insult attacked the exact insecurity his family had fought to erase. Young Master Su tried to intimidate the local officers with provincial connections. General Hai Yan barely reacted. This was his terrain. Without transfer orders acceptable to his command, he considered the flying army an armed outside force entering restricted territory. He warned that anyone moving forward could be treated as a rebel. The nobles shouted that killing them would bring powerful families down on Sanjo. Hai Yan laughed. They were deep in bandit mountains. If every outsider died, the report could simply blame criminals. He even implied that local forces had buried politically inconvenient soldiers before. The noble youths went silent. Their adventure had suddenly become much more real. Kuan Yin turned on Yidu. He assumed this confrontation was another negotiation trap. Yidu's scouts had explored deeper than flying army patrols. So Kuan Yin concluded, Yidu must have known the local garrison was waiting. He offered more money if Yidu would stop humiliating him. Yidu shook his head. If he already controlled officers this aggressive, he would never have needed Kuan Ying's expensive hat deal. The misunderstanding was irrational, only because Kuan Yin lacked Yidu's information. From the commander's perspective, Yidu kept revealing influence exactly when pressure increased. Vice Commander Zhang gave one final warning. Produce acceptable transfer orders or retreat. Kuan Yin refused to back down. Zhang raised his hand. Archers hidden across the trees revealed themselves. The first volley came without warning. Armor-piercing arrows slammed into flying army scouts. Several armored soldiers fell before shields could rise. The quality of the arrowheads shocked the nobles. A supposedly neglected local garrison was using expensive military-grade equipment capable of punching through protection. More shadows shifted among the trees. Nobody could count the full force hidden around the pass. Young nobles who had come for excitement began reconsidering every life choice that brought them there. Kuan Yin had heard stories about distant garrisons becoming private kingdoms under local commanders. He had dismissed much of it as exaggeration. Standing inside their prepared kill zone changed his opinion. The flying army excelled in open warfare and disciplined maneuver. A narrow mountain pass under elevated archers erased many of those advantages. Kuan Yin looked toward Priest Wang. The old Taoist finally stopped playing the harmless advisor. He brought forward elite shield bearers carrying reinforced rattan shields. Internal energy strengthened their stance. Their formation closed around key officers. Vice Commander Zhang mocked the display. Another volley struck the shields hard enough to drive several men backward. The confrontation had crossed from insults into open bloodshed. Yidu stayed near the rear, watching both armies waste attention on each other, while his drone continued showing movement higher on the ridge. The screen revealed patterns neither side seemed to understand. Groups were shifting above the pass. Large objects hidden under brush were being uncovered. Yidu's concern moved away from the argument entirely. Before he could decide how much to reveal, Priest Wang acted. The Taoist ordered shield units forward and coordinated scouts around the flank. He personally loosed an arrow that struck General Haiyan in the shoulder, while the local commander directed his archers. Flying army scouts dropped a weighted fishing net over the two garrison leaders. Vice Commander Zhang cut his way partly free. Haiyan remained trapped, bleeding and furious. Priest Wang offered terms, while both forces still had enough control to avoid total slaughter. The flying army wanted one objective after the campaign. Local garrison troops could keep the majority of bandit heads and the military credit attached to them. Zhang hesitated because profit finally entered the calculation. Kuan Yin turned toward Yidu again and repeated that any hidden price could simply be named. Yidu ignored the accusation. The drone feed had just confirmed what the old guide's fear meant. Deep gongs began sounding across the mountain. Dozens answered from different ridges. Every argument in the past stopped. Black-robed fighters emerged from the forest wearing red headbands. They moved in organized groups rather than charging like common thieves. Then brush coverings fell away from heavy wooden frames. Siege crossbows appeared. Their bolts were closer to small spears than arrows. More coverings moved. Catapults had been hidden along elevated ground. Yidu stared at the screen and then at the valley. Against infantry trapped below, those weapons could turn the entire expedition into a slaughterhouse. The first siege bolts came down before most of the expedition had processed what they were seeing. A frame-mounted crossbow released a shaft thick enough to punch through several ordinary shields in sequence. Catapult crews began loading stones above the valley. The bandits had spent time preparing this ground for exactly the kind of army now trapped beneath them. Kuan Ying's plan had assumed disciplined soldiers could overwhelm criminals once contact was made. That assumption collapsed when the criminals revealed weapons designed to break formations before melee even began. Priest Wang immediately became a priority target because everyone had seen him directing elite units. A mass of arrows rose from the trees toward him. The old Taoist moved with speed his filthy appearance never suggested. His horsehair whisk snapped across the air, caught part of the incoming cluster, and redirected enough arrows to open a narrow path. He rolled into the shield formation before the next wave landed. The local soldiers guarding captured General Haiyan were not as fortunate. Arrows ripped into them, while the wounded commander remained tangled in the net. Haiyan was struck several more times and started shouting curses at everyone equally. Kuan Yin drew his silver spear. Anger briefly overpowered judgment. He ordered a charge toward the ridge positions. He had taken only a few steps when betrayal came from behind. One of the private bodyguards attached to a noble group picked up an armor-piercing bolt from the ground. The man fired into Kuan Ying's back at close range. The lieutenant colonel collapsed with a scream. His guards immediately surrounded him. Nobody knew how many additional infiltrators might be hidden among the private troops. That uncertainty was almost as damaging as the wound. Commands contradicted each other. Some soldiers wanted to attack uphill. Others wanted to secure Kuan Yin. Noble retainers began searching one another for traitors instead of facing the ridge. The bandits exploited every second. Siege crossbows fired into compressed formations. Arrows poured toward officers. Stones from the catapults crashed into paths where men were trying to regroup. The flying army still reacted better than most forces would have. Veteran shield units locked together and moved forward under pressure. Officers restored sections of the line. Even with their commander wounded, they did not completely dissolve. But the enemy equipment and terrain kept draining men faster than discipline could replace them. Many bandits wore real armor. Their groups rotated through firing positions and used ridges to disappear before counterattacks reached them. This was organized warfare, not a panicked gang defending a hideout. Priest Wang launched a desperate countermeasure. A small elite detachment slipped around one flank carrying oil and fire. Their objective was simple: reach the catapults, burn as many siege engines as possible, and create breathing room below. Several machines caught fire. For a moment, smoke rose from the ridge and the valley cheered. Then bandit reserves closed on the infiltrators. The elite soldiers were outnumbered before they could withdraw. Their sacrifice damaged part of the siege line, but did not remove the threat. Vice Commander Zhang finally stopped arguing with the flying army. He watched black-robed fighters moving through the hills and recognized something much worse than Liang Mountain fugitives. These were connected to the Six Dragon Gang. That organization had been believed to have moved toward another province. Local forces assumed the old mountain territory was only being used by weaker refugees and scattered criminals. The assumption explained why Zhang and Haiyan had charged into the area seeking easy military credit. They had not been protecting a hidden bandit alliance. They had also been operating on bad intelligence. The flying army had bad intelligence about the local garrison. The local garrison had bad intelligence about the bandits. The nobles had bad intelligence about how dangerous the campaign would become. Almost everyone had entered Six Dragon Ridge, expecting someone else to be the fool. The mountain corrected all of them at once. The returning gang had also upgraded its equipment dramatically. Siege crossbows, catapults, armor, prepared firing lanes, and infiltrators required money and organization far beyond ordinary theft. Yidu immediately wondered who had supplied them. That question could wait. Survival could not. Chu Yu stood close to Yedu and stared at the chaos with the expression of a man discovering that his earlier mistakes were not the worst decisions on the mountain. He muttered that at least he had not personally marched an elite army into this trap. Yidu told him to stop celebrating relative intelligence. Wang Mengzi stepped in front of his teacher. The teenager's face was pale, but he did not retreat. He offered to hold the line with the 18 trained fighters while Yidu and Chu Yu escaped. Chu Yu nearly shouted at him. Even famous generals could not magically repair a valley full of siege weapons, hidden archers, infiltrators, and confused allied forces. Running seemed like the only rational plan. Yidu did not move. His attention stayed on the handheld screen, partially hidden by his clothing. The drone had never stopped flying. While Quan Ying, Priest Wang, Zhang Haiyan, and every noble commander reacted to what their eyes could reach, Yidu was watching the entire battlefield from above. He could see the ridge batteries. He could see where bandit reserves waited behind them. He could see which trails were blocked. He could see several paths the enemy had left, lightly guarded, because they assumed nobody below knew those paths existed. He could see supply carriers moving between hidden positions. He could see the routes used to move stones toward the catapults. He could see messengers running between command points. Most importantly, he could see that the siege arrangement was powerful because the Allied forces were trapped in exactly the positions the bandits expected. The enemy formation was not invincible. It was optimized for one battlefield shape. Change that shape, and advantages could become vulnerabilities. Chu Yu grabbed Yidu's arm and urged him to leave before the last retreat closed. Yidu asked where he planned to go. The main route behind them had already attracted hidden movement. Drone footage showed bandit teams positioning to cut stragglers and fleeing nobles. A blind retreat would send the expedition straight into another prepared kill zone. Chu Yu released his arm. The color drained from his face. Yidu then pointed subtly toward the siege weapons. Those machines were expensive. So was the armor. So were military-grade bolts, horses, stored food, and whatever treasury supported a bandit force of this size. Chu Yu stared at him. The flying army was being slaughtered. Their commander had been shot by a traitor, and Yidu was calculating asset value. Yidu saw no contradiction. Panic did not make the weapons less valuable. If anything, everyone else's panic created opportunities to capture things they would normally fight over. Meng Zi looked from his teacher to the mountain and tried to understand the shift. 10 days earlier, he would have called Yidu fearless. Now he knew better. Yidu had already explained that courage without understanding was stupidity. The calm in front of him came from information. Yidu was not ignoring danger. He was measuring it more accurately than anyone else present. That lesson changed Meng Zi's fear. The teenager stopped imagining a heroic sacrifice and started waiting for instructions. Yidu approved silently. On the ridge, the bandits increased pressure. A catapult stone smashed into a cluster of private soldiers and broke the formation around several noble youths. Men who had spent the previous week discussing poetry ran through dust and blood without caring who saw them cry. Young Master Su shouted for his father's guards to form around him. His earlier confidence at the banquet had vanished. The same young man who collapsed happily after one bowl of modern liquor now discovered a much less entertaining way to lose control of his legs. Priest Wang tried to restore a unified command. He ordered surviving flying army shield units to protect the wounded Quan Ying and create a moving center. He shouted toward Vice Commander Zhang that their political argument could continue only if both sides survived. Zhang answered with an insult, but started repositioning his archers to support the shield wall. Hatred had finally become less important than catapults. General Haiyan, still bleeding under the damaged net, demanded someone cut him free. A local soldier reached him and sliced the ropes. Haiyan could barely stand. He still began issuing terrain instructions to his own men. That told Yidu the general was worth more alive than the earlier political dispute suggested. Haiyan knew the mountain. If the expedition stabilized long enough to communicate, local knowledge could complement the drone. The problem was time. A siege bolt hit a shield near Priest Wang and drove the entire front rank backward. Another stone crashed into trees above the pass, showering splinters across both armies. Bandits began moving downhill behind the bombardment. They were preparing to convert ranged pressure into a full collapse. Yidu enlarged the drone image. One enemy group moved too early and created a temporary gap between two ridge positions. A supply trail behind them remained open. Another bandit detachment had clustered near stacked ammunition for the siege crossbows. The arrangement was efficient under normal conditions and dangerous if fire reached it. Farther away, several reserve groups waited beside a narrow path hidden from ground level. That path connected the main ridge to a rear area where horses and supplies were gathered. Yidu's breathing slowed. Pieces began fitting together. His 18 fighters were not enough to defeat several hundred bandits by force. They did not need to. A small disciplined unit with precise information could hit the right locations while larger armies occupied enemy attention. That was exactly why he had spent 10 days training them to move together. It was exactly why he carried modern surveillance into a medieval battlefield. The flying army had mocked standing drills because they saw no immediate reward. Now synchronized movement through narrow mountain paths could decide whether a small detachment reached an objective. Before the enemy reacted, Sukon crawled toward Yidu from lower cover. The beggar had been helping Little Tiger pull wounded men away from exposed ground. He asked what Yidu needed. No speech, no questions about glory, just a practical request for work. Yidu pointed toward a sheltered depression and ordered Sukon to gather his scouts there. Little Tiger was to identify who among the nearby locals knew side trails. Chu Yu's retainers were to stop complaining and start collecting usable shields from fallen men. Mengzi was ordered to keep the 18 fighters together and prevent anyone from charging without permission. Each command converted panic into a task. That alone changed the small group's posture. Men who had been staring at falling stones started moving with purpose. Chu Yu watched the transformation and realized Yidu had not yet given an attack order. He was rebuilding control first. On the drone screen, another piece of information appeared. Some bandit units were not looking toward the valley at all. They were watching rear slopes and communication trails. That suggested the mountain force feared interference or protected something beyond the visible camp. The expensive military hardware might not be the only valuable secret on Six Dragon Ridge. Yidu stored that possibility. He could investigate only after preventing annihilation. Kuan Yin regained enough awareness to speak. His guards had removed the bolt without worsening the wound, and Priest Wang kept him behind shields. The commander demanded to know which allied household had supplied the traitor. Nobody could answer. The private armies were too mixed. The betrayal made Kuan Yin finally understand how badly his expedition had been penetrated. His proud march through towns had gathered support, but it also gave enemies endless chances to observe, recruit, bribe, and infiltrate. The same social network that fed his army had opened doors into it. Yidu considered that another lesson worth remembering. Every strength created an attack surface. Kuan Yin saw Yidu's group moving with unusual order and shouted toward him. He asked whether Yidu had a plan. This time there was no mockery in the commander's voice. There was pain, anger, and the first trace of genuine dependence. Yidu did not answer immediately. Kuan Yin had spent days trying to establish hierarchy through food, status, and public performance. The mountain had erased those games. Now results were the only authority left. Priest Wang followed Kuan Ying's gaze and noticed the 18 recruits holding formation under fire. His earlier fascination returned. Farmers who had trained for only days were not running. They were frightened. Their faces made that obvious, but they were still waiting for Yidu. That distinction mattered. Real discipline did not remove fear. It kept fear from choosing actions. A stone landed near the ridge and sent dust rolling over the pass. Yidu used the moment to move closer to Priest Wang and the local commanders. He could not reveal the drone openly. No one present needed to know how much information he possessed. Instead, he phrased observations as conclusions from scouts and terrain study. He warned that the retreat route was compromised. General Haiyan swore and demanded proof. Yidu described the likely interception points. Haiyan stopped arguing because each location matched places an experienced local ambusher would choose. Vice Commander Zhang asked how a village chief knew the mountain that well. Yidu told him this was not the time for biographies. Priest Wang almost smiled. Kuan Yin did not. The commander finally understood that Yidu had been carrying information the expedition never possessed. Yidu then asked Haiyan about 2 minor side paths visible on his private map. The general confirmed that both existed, but were difficult, steep, and rarely used by large groups. Perfect. Large groups were not what Yidu intended to move. He asked Priest Wang how many elite soldiers remained capable of climbing and fighting after the failed flank attack. The Taoist gave a cautious number. Yidu asked Zhang how many local archers could suppress one ridge without moving from current cover. Zhang answered after a moment. Chu Yu's expression changed. This was no longer random conversation. Yidu was assembling capabilities. Kuan Yin tried to sit upright and asked again what Yidu planned. Yidu told him first to stop thinking like the expedition still had one army. They had flying army veterans, local garrison troops, noble private soldiers, beggar scouts, and Yidu's 18 men. Different strengths, different weaknesses. Trying to command them as one identical block had helped create the chaos. Priest Wong nodded slowly. The old man understood immediately. Local archers knew the slopes. Flying army shields could survive heavy ranged pressure longer than most. Noble private troops were less reliable, but numerous enough to hold safe ground and move wounded. Sukan's network could carry messages through disorder without attracting much attention. Yidu's trained squad could execute short, precise movements. The structure was ugly, but ugly tools still worked when used correctly. Hai Yan asked, who had given a village chief permission to assign roles to government officers. Another siege bolt buried itself nearby. Yidu looked at him. Hai Yan decided rank could be discussed after survival. A messenger arrived from the lower trail with worse news. Bandit movement had appeared behind parts of the expedition. The main retreat was indeed being closed. Chu Yu looked at Yidu as if the prediction had been magic. Yidu ignored the expression. The drone had made it almost unfair. He ordered Sukan to send runners through covered ground and verify one side path the old guide had mentioned earlier. The terrified guide was still alive near the rear. Sukan found him and returned with confirmation. The path was steep but passable for small groups. It led toward a shelf below one of the bandit support positions. Yidu had already seen the shelf from above. Now he had human confirmation. That mattered. Technology could fail. Terrain scenes from the sky could hide cliffs, loose stone, or vegetation impossible to cross. Yidu would not gamble lives on one source of information when two were available. This was the habit that separated strategy from confidence. Wang Mengzi listened closely. Every lesson Yidu had given him over hot pot now appeared in practice. Information, resources, risk, movement, no heroic shouting, no attack simply because anger demanded one. Mengzi suddenly understood why Yidu had rejected him earlier. A soldier who only wanted to charge would be useless here. A commander had to think while people screamed. The bandit advance continued. Black-robed fighters reached lower positions and began probing the shield wall. Flying army soldiers counterattacked with short, controlled pushes. The narrow terrain prevented either side from committing full numbers. That bought time. Yidu watched a supply team on the drone screen carry new bolts toward an elevated crossbow battery. The men followed the same route each trip. Routine created predictability. Predictability created targets. He traced the route with one finger on the screen where nobody else could see. Then he looked toward the smoke from the partially burned catapult position. Wind was moving across the ridge in a useful direction. Fire could do more than destroy one engine. It could create visibility problems, force ammunition movement, and break communication. Yidu's modern life had taught him that technology mattered less than systems. The drone was valuable because it fed decisions. The merchant shop was valuable because it supplied tools. Training was valuable because men could execute those decisions together. None of those advantages worked alone. For the first time since entering the mountain, all three were about to overlap. Chu Yu saw Yidu's expression change. He recognized the same look from negotiations. The look Yidu wore when everyone else thought a situation was impossible, and Yidu started calculating profit. Chu Yu asked whether he was seriously considering attacking instead of surviving. Yidu answered that surviving and winning were not always separate objectives. If they broke the enemy's control of the ridge, the escape problem changed automatically. If they captured equipment and command positions, the political fight over military credit would also change. Everyone around him had been treating the bandits as one giant wall. The drone showed a network of smaller parts. Break the right parts, and the wall stopped behaving like a wall. Priest Wong heard enough to become interested. He asked which part Yidu would strike first. Yidu did not answer yet. He wanted one more drone pass over the rear supply zone. The cardboard aircraft banked above the ridge. On the screen, the hidden camp came into clearer view. More stores, more weapons, more movement than a normal bandit hideout should support. This operation had money behind it. Perhaps political protection too. The exact sponsor remained unknown, but the scale confirmed Yidu's earlier instinct. Six Dragon Ridge was not merely a bounty target. It was an economic and military prize. Kuan Yin finally stopped trying to stand. He looked at Priest Wong, then at Yidu. Pride had cost him enough for one day. He told Yidu that if there was a workable plan, the flying army would listen. General Hai Yan objected to taking commands from an outsider. Vice Commander Zhang pointed toward the burning siege engines and asked whether Hai Yan had a better idea. The general cursed again. Then he agreed to hear it. Yidu looked over the gathered officers. Hours earlier, they had been threatening to kill one another over jurisdiction. Now bandit artillery had turned them into an accidental coalition. That was not trust. It did not need to be. Shared danger was enough for the next decision. Yidu told them the first priority was no longer the visible bandit line. It was the enemy's information and supply flow. Break communication, interrupt ammunition, force reserves to move. and the siege positions would begin fighting separate battles. Priest Wang's eyes narrowed with understanding. That approach matched the terrain better than another direct charge. Hai Yan asked how Yi Du could know where the supply routes were. Yi Du said his scouts had done their job. Sukan, standing nearby in ragged clothes, smiled without confirming or denying anything. The answer protected the drone and elevated the beggar network at the same time. Kuan Ying looked at Sukan differently. The man he mocked at the beginning of the march was now being used as cover for intelligence better than his own unit possessed. Humiliation could become educational if a person survived it. Another bandit volley struck. The officers scattered back toward cover before the full plan could be issued. Yi Du returned to his 18 men. Mengzi waited at the front. The teenager asked whether he would be allowed to fight. Yi Du answered that fighting was never the reward. Completing the assigned objective and returning alive was the reward. Mengzi nodded. That answer would have disappointed him 10 days earlier. Now it made sense. Yi Du checked the stab-resistant vest beneath Mengzi's clothing and tightened one loose strap. The boy stood completely still. Yi Du then inspected the rest of the squad. They were exhausted from marching, frightened by siege weapons, and far less experienced than the flying army veterans dying around them. They were also fed, conditioned, disciplined, and still together. That was enough to give them a role. Sukan returned with Little Tiger and several route observations. Each matched the drone footage closely enough for Yi Du to trust the path. Chuyu had gathered additional shields. Priest Wang's surviving elites were ready to support a diversion. Local archers had identified 2 firing points. The pieces existed. What remained was timing. Above them, bandit gongs changed rhythm. Yi Du watched reserves begin shifting on the screen. The enemy believed the Allied forces were close to collapse and was preparing to press harder. That confidence created the opening Yi Du had been waiting for. He looked once toward the retreat route, still blocked. Running remained worse than fighting intelligently. Then he looked toward the ridge battery, supply trail, and hidden path now clear on the drone display. Everyone else saw hundreds of bandits, siege engines, infiltrators, wounded commanders, and a valley turning into a graveyard. Yi Du saw individual positions connected by routes that could be disrupted. He had spent years surviving through military experience in this body, modern knowledge from another life, and a merchant system nobody around him could understand. Now those advantages had finally converged on one battlefield. The shotgun had once let him defeat 30 bandits through raw technological surprise. Six Dragon Ridge required something more. It required turning information into command. Yi Du closed his hand around the small screen and gave Mengzi the first real battlefield order of his apprenticeship. The source ended before that order was carried out. What remained certain was the position Yi Du had reached at that moment. The flying army was wounded. The local garrison was trapped. The nobles were panicking, and the Six Dragon Gang believed its ambush had already won. But the enemy had one weakness none of them knew existed. A cardboard drone above the ridge had exposed the entire shape of their battlefield. With every major position visible on his screen, Yi Du looked at the supposedly hopeless mountain and saw an opportunity.